When the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth?
Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief.
May our testimonies be as deep and as strong as that of Jacob, who, when confronted by one who sought to destroy his faith, declared, "I could not be shaken."
Hello, Unshaken Saints. I'm Jared Halverson. Welcome back to Scripture Study. The last 3 weeks, we have covered 150 chapters of Scripture. It's been a whirlwind tour through the Psalms, but I hope that it's been a spiritual experience for you. There is so much song and praise and gratitude and wrestling with the inner demons. You name the human emotion, it's somewhere in the Psalms. And now one of you pointed out that I had totally spaced the Joseph Smith translation of Psalms 11 and 14. Thank you for reminding me of that. They're amazing, and it deepens our understanding of those particular Psalms because it grounds them in the second coming. It's amazing. During the Joseph Smith period, so many of the hymns that early saints wrote, Parley P. Pratt is one of my favorite examples of this, were so focused on the second coming. And it's amazing to think of the psalmists looking forward to that great culminating day as well. And so go back. I'm sorry I didn't do it when we were there, but go back and make sure you study the Joseph Smith translation editions that are in the appendix. They're too big for the footnotes. That's why I missed them. I didn't look down as I should have. But they're wonderful, amazing. And again, be thinking of second coming and sing it. Sing it with all your heart. Now, Psalms that we studied the last 3 weeks, and Job the week before that, together with what we'll cover today, which is Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and yes, we're even going to hit on the Song of Solomon. We won't go verse by verse on that one, don't worry. But there are some beautiful passages there that we need to spend some time in, and that sums up the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. It's a wonderful section, and if you had to pick a single word to associate with each of those books of wisdom literature, then for Job it would be suffering, for Psalms it would be praise, for Proverbs it would be wisdom, for Ecclesiastes it would be vanity, and for Song of Solomon it would be love. And hopefully, as we try to wrap our heads around that, if we can associate that book with that word, then we'll have a good idea of what the book is all about. And we're going to start today with the book of Proverbs. Its word is wisdom, and in some ways, it is the ultimate example of wisdom literature, because that's all it's trying to do, is to convey some words of wisdom. It's not as spiritual as the Psalms were. If we had praise the last 3 weeks, we get practicality this week, okay? And just words of wisdom that if you want to live a good life, and a counsel that is eminently practical. If you ever want to sit on the porch swing with Grandpa and him not to tell you stories, but to give you words of advice, well, sit down with the writer of Proverbs. Throughout history, it's typically been attributed to King Solomon. And who better to give us the wisdom of the ages than Solomon? Much of it, I'm sure, was written by others as well. But to understand, well, I'll put it this way. For me, perhaps the best example of what this book is all about is if you've ever seen Fiddler on the Roof. And good old Tevye, who's wandering around, and he always seems to say, "As the good book says," and then he'll quote something that the good book never said. But it sounds biblical. Because it's words of wisdom. And so he'll say things like, "As the good book says, if you spit in the air, it lands in your face." That's nowhere in the Hebrew Bible. But it is pretty good counsel. So don't spit in the air, okay? And so we are going to be spending a lot of time in things that the good book actually does say. But they're along the lines of what Tevye gave us as far as those words of wisdom are concerned. And if your grandpa on the porch swing, or if your mom or dad has ever said things like this, then you're well prepared for a study of the book of Proverbs. Here's a few. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Did you ever hear that? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Better late than never. The early bird catches the worm. Never look a gift horse in the mouth. You can't judge a book by its cover. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. or the one my dad told me all the time growing up, don't sweat the small stuff. Now, each of those could be a lesson of their own. And some of them need explanation. If you ever use one of these old sayings, these adages on your kids, and they look at you quizzically, it's just like, wait, what? Then you know, okay, that one makes sense to you, but it needs some explaining for the rising generation. Like not looking a gift horse in the mouth. That would have made perfect sense for the days where people bought horses, or gave horses in that case. But since we don't typically do much of that anymore, that's one that needs an explanation. And we're going to see some of that in what we see today. Some of them are straightforward and self-explanatory. Some of them, in fact, are the ancient Jewish equivalent of some of the proverbs that we still say today in different terms. Others are based in cultural understandings, and we'll need a little help unpacking those. But what's beautiful about it is every nation seems to have its own store of proverbs, its own store of wise sayings based on culture and normal life. Here's a few that I found online that I thought were fascinating. Here's one from Kenya. When elephants fight, it is the grass that gets hurt. Now, I don't know how many Kenyans are listening in or how many of us have actually spent time around elephants, but I think that one makes sense when you picture it in your mind. Here's one from Sweden. The pillow is the best advisor. We often say things like, well, let's sleep on it, okay? I'm going to let some time pass and give myself some perspective, and I'll sleep on it and get back to you in the morning. Well, that's what the Swedes were suggesting. Here's an interesting one from Japan. A frog in a well does not know the great sea. Interesting. Do we get a little myopic in our own circumstances? Or from Turkey. If the world flooded, it wouldn't matter to the duck. Okay. Iceland, empty barrels make the most noise. Oh, that's an interesting one that I can think of a few people associated with that. Ethiopia, when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. It's a great phrase. From Poland, the egg thinks it's smarter than the hen. Some of you parents raising teenagers might want to commit that Polish proverb to memory. Norway, the bear and the bear hunter have different opinions. Yeah, I would say so. Or from Italy, he who has a head of wax must not walk in the sun. As the good book says, right? Or one of my favorites from Brazil, a dog bitten by a snake is afraid of sausages. That one, yeah, I guess that would make sense, okay? Anyway, every culture seems to have those kinds of proverbial sayings. And so we're going to spend our time today, this first half at least, in the proverbial wisdom of ancient Israel. So there's not going to be a storyline here. There's not going to be a plot that we're going to have to follow. In fact, when I used to teach the book of Proverbs in seminary, I would typically do it, we would have a game of proverbial Jeopardy. And there were enough themes that run throughout the book of Proverbs. Wisdom is a huge one. It runs throughout. Other ones like honesty or morality. There's interesting ones on women. The boys always loved those ones. But it's not just that it's not gender specific. Flip it around, and if some of these proverbs are men shaking their heads at women, it's equally true of women shaking their heads at men. And then we would just play proverbial Jeopardy, and the students would say, "Oh, can I have wisdom for 300, Alex?" And we'd look at that one, and I'd share a proverb about wisdom, and they would have to explain it, with or without a question phrase, okay? But it was an interesting way for the students to wrap their heads around, oh, okay, yeah, this is making sense. Once I can unpack or try to understand what it is that they're saying, these really are wise words worth following. And so we're going to play a long game of proverbial Jeopardy today. And it's not going to be thematic. We're just going to go chapter by chapter like we're used to. But let's start in Proverbs chapter 1. And we're going to read most of the beginning of it to try to get into the flow and into the spirit of what these Proverbs convey. So verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. Again, he was most famous for his wisdom, so he's a good one to assign these to. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, To receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity. Think about that list. All of those things require great wisdom. How can we be just in every circumstance? Think of Solomon with those two women fighting over the child. How to be fair to all concerned. There's equity. How to judge properly in every single circumstance. We need wisdom for that. To give subtlety, which we could say prudence, to the simple. To the young man, knowledge and discretion. Those three verses, 2, 3, and 4, have about as many synonyms as you could ask for to describe what we'll be studying in the book of Proverbs. Then verse 5 and 6, a wise man will hear and will increase learning. A man of understanding will attain unto wise counsels. So it's good that we're going to be spending our time in this book today. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. Other translations of that same verse use words like parables, riddles, clever sayings, figures of speech, enigmas. Those are all great words for those dark sayings that often require some interpretation on our part. So hopefully we'll be able to count on some of that today to make sense of this wonderful literature. Verse 7, it really begins. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now, I can't think of a better way to really introduce the kinds of pithy sayings that we're going to find in the book of Proverbs. This one is phrased in a way that you will see so often, it becomes kind of the main model or the general pattern that most Proverbs tend to follow. It will say something positive and then compare it to something negative. In case it didn't make total sense the first half, then compare it to the second half, and then it's like, oh yeah, I want to stay on the first half. And the conjunction that connects the two is the word but. And in so many of the chapters, almost every verse has a but right in the middle to compare these two halves. So there in verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's the good half. Wow, it's the beginning of knowledge. No wonder it's coming here at the beginning of Proverbs. If you really want to gain wisdom, then the way it begins is to fear the Lord, to reverence Him, to honor Him, because He's the source of all real wisdom. You thought Solomon was wise. He's nothing compared to the wisdom of an omniscient Father in heaven. And so if we really want to begin to gain real knowledge and understanding of how the world works and how we ought to navigate life within it, then turn to the Lord. It's going to come from Him. Remember, that was Solomon's initial prayer. I don't need riches. I don't care for long life. I'm not worried about my enemies. I've been given the responsibility to lead a people like the sands of the sea. And so I will need wisdom to meet their every need, along with justice and judgment and equity and understanding and instruction and everything else we saw at the beginning of this chapter. And he turned to the Lord to receive it. So what a perfect way to begin our study. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It's where it's got to begin. But let's compare it to the other half. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. So I guess we'll get to pick which one we'll be today. Are we going to be the wise that turn to the Lord for instruction, or are we going to be foolish and despise it, thinking we know of ourselves? Now from here on out, I'm going to be jumping all over chapters, kind of skipping rocks through it, so I just hit the ones that I found most either in need of explanation, or some that don't need much explanation, but just, those are the ones we really need to commit to memory or put into practice in our lives. So we're going to start in verse 8 of Proverbs 1. My son, and interesting that we'll see many Proverbs today that put things in terms of my son or ye children. This idea of helping the rising generation gain some wisdom of their own. The old tend to have much more wisdom than the young because they've learned through life. And so my son, here's my counsel for you. Hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. This is relational wisdom. This is a loving set of parents that are trying to help their children grow up in God. And think of that with capital P and not just lowercase. A father and mother in heaven. We will see her today. Of all the places in Scripture, there's a chapter in Proverbs that gives us an insight into mother in heaven that is absolutely breathtaking. And so keep an eye out for that. But from father and mother, passing down the wisdom of the ages, so that we children can grow up in them. I mean, in a way, that's the way the Book of Mormon begins, very first verse, right? I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, thank you for the wisdom you passed down, Lehi and Sariah, mom and dad and mom, to say that my father taught me somewhat in all his learning. I may not get everything from him, that's the somewhat, but he did teach me a little bit of everything that he knew. And we're going to see that in this book as well. The next few verses, he warns against associating with evildoers. That would be among the foolish. And then he says in verse 17, here's his words of wisdom, surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. Now, that one you got to think for a minute. If the bird is sitting there on the branch watching you lay out the net, yeah, it's probably going to be a little harder for you to catch it, because it's aware of what you're trying to do. That's a great pithy proverb. And so as we think about it in our own life, how aware am I of the snares that are being set by my adversaries? I think too often we kind of go blindly through life, not aware of what we're up against. Or how about this counsel in 22 and 23? It's not a pithy proverb like we saw about the bird and the net, but it is some great advice. He says, how long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. How long is it going to be before you start paying attention to what I'm about to teach you? We're only 22 verses into this book, and we got a long ways to go. So I hope that you're open to it. He says, turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. And that's a good way to introduce this book of Proverbs as well. Don't tire of them. Don't hate knowledge. Because the things that I'm going to convey, especially if the Spirit is poured out upon you so that they make sense and they are infused into your soul, when you realize this is the best way to live. When you study Proverbs and think, life doesn't have to be as hard as I tend to make it. Maybe I have been foolish. And if I could simply be wise, much better days ahead. In verse 28 through 30, he then tells us how those foolish and simple will end up. Then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. I mean, why should I? They're not going to listen anyway. It's a little too late here. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me, for that they hated knowledge, and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would none of my counsel. They despised all my reproof. Like I said, it's too late there. This is, you made your bed, so now you get to lie in it. I hate to say I told you so, but I did. And so as he finishes chapter 1, hopefully we're in the proper spirit to actually open our minds, open our hearts, and sit a spell on the porch swing with Grandpa. We need this counsel. And if we can be wise enough to recognize our lack of wisdom, if we can not despise the things that the Lord would say, including reproof, because there will be some places today, hopefully, that hurt us in a good way, that it give us a little twinge of guilt or prick the conscience and realize, that's advice that I need to take. Keep an eye out for that. Those will be the most important Proverbs that we study. Let's turn to chapter 2, though. And just one passage to bring up in this chapter. Starting in verse 2, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom. So again, if you're hard of hearing, just incline, lean over a little closer. Listen for it, even in the most unlikely of places. Apply thine heart to understanding. So it's not just ear, it's heart engaged as well. Strive to make sense of the things that we hear, master the principles. Don't just memorize the saying, but put it into practice. He goes on, yea, if thou criest after knowledge, and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver, and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord, and find the knowledge of God. I love the way he puts that. Again, introductory proverb, trying to prepare us for the rest of this book. How badly do you want it? What price are you willing to pay to gain the wisdom and knowledge and understanding that you say you want? Is it worth spending some time in Scripture? Is it worth having conversations with those that have gone before? There's a wonderful old story of Socrates, famous for his wisdom. He would have been the Solomon of ancient Greece. And a young man went to Socrates and said, I want to know what you know. I want to be as wise as you are. And Socrates said, okay, well, let's go head down to the beach. And so he did, and waded into the water and took the young man, according to the story, and put him under the water, held his head down below the surface until the young man started to thrash and try to come up for air. And Socrates just held him down to the point of almost drowning him. When he finally let him go and the young man came up gasping for air, wondering, what on earth, you're not teaching me, you're trying to kill me. What's going on? And Socrates wisely asked him, what were you thinking about when you were down under the water? What did you want? Well, air, obviously. Anything else on your list? No. Well, when you desire wisdom to the same degree of intensity that you desired air, then come back and see me. In fact, you might not need to see me at all. You will find ways to gain that kind of knowledge. Again, if you value it like silver and search for it like a hidden treasure, because it is. Seek and ye shall find. That's what it boils down to. And so let's seek in the chapters that lie ahead the wisdom that can come from God. Proverbs 3 verse 1. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. These really are the wisest ways to live. I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus will say. And so here's the way of wisdom. I love his list. Length of days, long life, peace, all of those things will come as we live the gospel of Jesus Christ. Think about the word of wisdom, for example, revealed to Joseph Smith long before medical expertise could back it up. And yet it has. When President Hinckley was interviewed on 60 Minutes, I believe, he brought up a study done by UCLA that discovered that Latter-day Saints, on average, live like an extra 10 years of life. And to think about what the word of wisdom allows, talk about long life, it's there. As my wife and son work with addiction recovery patients, and realizing that had we been a little wiser, had we lived the gospel, we would have stayed out of the kinds of addictions that are trapping us now. And so often it's the principles of the gospel that will help us become free of that. How's that for the peace that is promised? And then length of days, that's an interesting one, because it sounds like, isn't that the same as long life? Well, I suppose it could be a repetition. But then again, if we leave kind of overall longevity to the phrase long life, and then speak of days specifically, length of days, my favorite time of day is dusk. I love sunset and the lighting, and just there's something magical about it. But the problem is it goes by so fast. If I could just extend and lengthen dusk, I'd do it probably every day. I was in Alaska a few years ago during the summer, and you want to talk about a near eternal dusk? I was in heaven. It was amazing. And the days were so long, and I wanted to extend them because they were so beautiful. And I think there's something to be said about living life in a wise way that makes you want to lengthen every day because you're just enjoying living it. Think about the challenge of depression as the opposite. And those that are struggling with that through no fault of their own, they don't want the day to last, because then I have to be awake and dealing with these negative emotions. No wonder depression so often leads to, I just want to sleep. Because if I can be free of that and out of my own head, please shorten the day and let the night come. I mean, my day seems to feel like night anyway, so at least let the night come so I can sleep it off or sleep it away. I'm not saying that depression means you're not living the gospel. That's the last thing I would imply. And I'm not saying that the gospel cures clinical depression automatically. But I will say that that living the principles of the gospel is the wisest way to live. That there are so many wonderful pieces of counsel and advice that will help us deal with depression if you struggle with it, or if it's not a clinical issue for you, you will be able to avoid the kinds of non-clinical things that depress people. Things like sin, things like foolishness, things like regret. So length of days, yes. I would love dusk in Alaska. Bring it on. How about verse 3? Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. Oh, mercy and truth, there's a contrary for you. These are positive polarities, opposites that need to be kept in balance. If truth is on the strict side and mercy is on the more lenient, remember we talked about this in Psalms, let them kiss each other. This is a match made in heaven. Let them stay and hold on, and you hold on to them, both of them. Hold on to both mercy and truth. Bind them around your neck so they're close to the mind and on your thoughts. Put them upon the table, engrave them on the fleshy tables of the heart to feel the truth and reality of these things. I mean, if you can internalize these dual demands, I don't think there's any situation in life you won't be able to handle. In fact, it will help you live both the first and second great commandments. Truth will help you honor God, and mercy will help you honor your fellow man. In fact, if you look at verse 4, there's that suggestion. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God, first great commandment, and man, second great commandment. Verse 5 and 6, one of the most famous of Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Ah, such great advice. Not to trust in the arm of flesh, but to trust in God instead. Remember that very first chapter of Proverbs, the beginning of wisdom. What is it? It's the fear of the Lord. Start there. Trust in him. Don't lean to thy own understanding. Again, that idea of leaning, incline thine ear, that's lean to him. Lean unto thine own understanding, that's lean toward you. And often when we're making a decision and we say something like, well, I'm leaning in this direction. Well, if you and God can't seem to agree on something, yeah, I would probably lean in his direction rather than yours. If it seems to be a 50-50 split, it's probably not 50-50. Okay, so go with God and trust him. By the way, I love that verb because it's already acknowledging, you know he's there. You kind of know what he wants. It's just a matter of trusting that he does know things better than we do. Sadly, we live in a day where God's existence is doubted. And so as a result, when we talk about, do you believe in God? We're not talking trust. We're just talking about, do you think he exists at all? Ontology is the study of being. And sadly, do you believe in God has become an ontological question instead of a relational one. When I say I believe in myself, that's not ontology. I'm not doubting that I exist. I'm just expressing confidence that, yeah, I can do this. When I say I believe in you, I'm not trying to convince you, you really do exist. It's not an ontological question. It's a relational one. And I'm saying, you got this. You can do this. And so when I say I believe in God, I'm long past the question of does he exist. I've had enough experience to convince myself fully of God's existence, and more than his existence, his desire for a relationship with little old me. So yes, I believe in him with all my heart. I trust him as a result. I know what he's like, and I know what he wants for me. And so when we don't seem to see eye to eye, it's myself I doubt rather than him. And I trust in him. That's where I'm leaning. And sure enough, he is directing my paths, and I'm grateful for it. Verse 7 and 8, the next proverb, be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It shall be health in thy navel and marrow to thy bones. That last phrase we associate with the word of wisdom in Doctrine and Covenants, section 89. And yes, it does give us health in the navel and marrow in the bones. But if you think about the navel, which is so, it didn't hit me till my mission when I was reading the Doctrine and Covenants in Spanish. And when I saw the word of wisdom and it's like, a salud en el ombligo. I'm like, what's ombligo mean? I looked it up, like, oh, the belly button. Okay, yeah, you'll have a healthy belly button. I'm like, what? Did it always say that? Navel sounds, I don't know, lofty enough that I don't associate it with my belly button. Health in the navel just sounds, it kind of rolls off the tongue. Marrow in the bones. Do we actually think about the specific body part we're dealing with? I think that's the key. It's not just a healthy belly button, but think about when you were in the womb and your entire body was blessed through the umbilical cord. Every good gift that mother had to send you came through the navel. And so health in the navel is a blessing to the whole body. Marrow in the bones, to think about what bone marrow does and how it blesses and keeps healthy the whole body. White blood cells, to think about what the Lord is suggesting there in the word of wisdom, D&C 89. Well, same phrase here in a book that from start to finish is dedicated to words of wisdom. Well, your entire body and soul will be blessed if you will live according to this counsel. So please be wise. God knows what he's talking about. Verse 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. I'm grateful that the Lord gives us counsel not just for the spiritual aspects of our life, but for the temporal ones as well. And like we saw in Doctrine and Covenants 29, there's nothing purely temporal for God anyway. It's all spiritual to him. So though I said we went from praise to practicality when we went from Psalms to Proverbs, well, here's some, it's still spiritual as far as God is concerned. So how do you spiritually live your temporal life? Honor God. In fact, be more like him. Turn your temporality into spirituality and honor the Lord with your substance. The first fruits of thine increase, there was a feast of first fruits. There was an offering of first fruits that was given to God at the temple. Well, do we do the same? Do we carve out our 10% tithing from the beginning of our paycheck? And again, that doesn't have to be chronological, but is that our priority? The first thing as we think, how can I bless God with the things that he has blessed me with? And how can I bless others as well? And so honoring the Lord with our substance. And the irony, or the beautiful promise, God will bless you and multiply the 90% you have left. He'll bless and multiply whatever you have to more than compensate for your so-called sacrifice, which ends up looking more like an investment when all is said and done. Amazing rate of return. In verse 11 and 12, how's this one? My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a son, the father in whom he delighteth. Oh, please understand that being chastised by God is a sign of his belief in you. It'd be easier, I think as a parent, I get this, that I keep hounding my kids on certain things, well, hounding is not the right way to do it. But I do correct, and I do coach, and I do teach my children because I believe in them. And I see the big picture, and I play the long game, and I want them to turn out, and I know that they can. They are. I'm grateful for that. But God is the same with us. I would be more concerned if I was playing a sport and my coach never said anything, never gave me any feedback, because then I'm kind of an out of sight, out of mind. It's like he's thinking, he's probably not going to play much anyway, so just let him do his thing, and I'm not going to invest much attention in his improvement. It's amazing how invested God is in our progress. And so be open to his chastening. He's doing it as a loving father. And as we saw in Doctrine and Covenants 121, every time he reproves us with sharpness, he pours out additional love afterwards so that we know that he wasn't doing this out of anger, but out of kindness, out of a recognition of our glorious potential. We ought to do the same. Or the last one I'll share from Proverbs 3, verse 27. Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of thine hand to do it. You ever heard the saying, never suppress a generous thought? Or never withhold a compliment when you can give one? There's the better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln described it. And when you notice something positive about someone, say it. Someone does something, a kind thing, express gratitude. Acknowledge things. We saw this chapter begin with acknowledge God in all of these things and He'll direct thy paths. Well, we end with acknowledge others. And when you can do someone some good, when you're mowing your lawn and you see that the neighbors could use a trim, why not do it? If it's in your power, and that's a great phrase, if it's in the power of thine hand. King Benjamin said, don't run faster than you have strength, in the context of giving to the poor, doing good to others. When you're truly converted, you want to go above and beyond in that, and to the point that God has to rein you in. Well, most of us don't need to be reined in. We need to be pushed forward. And so great advice. Don't withhold good if you can give it. Turning the page to chapter 4, look at verse 5 through 8. Get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. We keep seeing incline, well here's decline. Which way are you leaning? Don't decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honor when thou dost embrace her. Now, he seems to say the same thing twice with similar imagery, and this one is worth repeating. What are we after? What are we seeking in life? Get wisdom, get understanding. Let me say that again. In all thy getting, thinking back to the temporal side, while you're getting all of that, I hope that you're getting what matters infinitely more. Getting this kind of wisdom. But then the other part that is repeated twice also is this gendered language about loving her, embracing her. And if you do, then what will she do? She'll keep thee, she'll promote thee, she'll bless thee. Sounds like an amazing woman. Who are we talking about? Well, Lady Wisdom, the woman of understanding. I love that these words are gendered female. Too often in our day, we gender rationality male and emotionality female. There's some reason for that. However, you better not separate or uncouple that contrary to the point that you think that men don't feel or women don't think, because neither one is correct. But to see the way, justice and mercy is a good one. The Book of Mormon does this explicitly even in the English, that justice is gendered male and mercy is gendered female. And there's some good reason behind that as well. Here, to gender wisdom and understanding in the feminine, I think is beautiful. If you think about relationships, and I need to have a relationship with wisdom and understanding so that it really does direct my paths. If I love her, I guess this is, if he's writing primarily to a male audience, for example, then of course he's going to gender what they should be seeking in the feminine, telling these men, you want to fall in love with someone worth marrying? Marry wisdom. Love her, embrace her, and she will bless you forever. This needs to be an eternal companionship. Fast forward to verse 19, and what's the opposite? The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble. That's a great analogy. What's wickedness look like? Well, it looks like darkness. Oh, in fact, it looks like mists of darkness. Thank you, Lehi's Green. And here we are stumbling around. If it weren't for the iron rod, who knows what we would trip up over. And that's what I love about the way he puts it. They know not at what they stumble. It's amazing that, well, like we saw in the earlier proverb, that is the bird watching to see the net being laid out before them? Are we aware of it? Or are we living wickedly, no wisdom illuminating our path, to the point that we are blindly stumbling around And we don't even see the tripwires that the adversary has set up for us. It would be so frustrating to walk a path and trip every time you do it. And you can't figure out why. And you have no idea what you're stumbling over. We need to turn to God's wisdom, His instruction, the words of prophets, those watchmen on the tower, the words of Scripture that are a lamp unto our feet. Then we won't trip up over things. In Proverbs 5, here's an interesting one. This would go under, whenever we played proverbial Jeopardy in seminary, the boys loved. I think we maxed out women in Proverbs before any other topic. Because we're like, okay, women for 100, women for 200, women for 300. Well, here's women for 100. But again, don't get tripped up over the gender here. Men have challenges with women, and women have challenges with men, and either way, here's one of those challenges. Proverbs 5, 3 through 6. For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell. Lest thou shouldst ponder the path of life. Other translations say, she gives no thought to the way of life. That makes more sense. Her ways are movable, that thou canst not know them. Now, again, like I said, this is gendered language. But if it's a male audience he's writing to, then of course he's going to warn them about strange women. And strange, he means foreign. Now, if this indeed comes from Solomon, he needed to take his own advice. Or maybe this is written later as he starts to realize, yes, 700 wives and 300 concubines, among whom most are strange women, foreign marriages of diplomacy and trade. That wasn't very wise of me now, was it? How did I get sucked into this? Well, their lips were like honey, and their words were like oil. Think about sin. And again, you don't have to gender it, but the idea of being seduced by it, that's why gendering this is actually valuable. That to see the seductive nature of sin, that Satan doesn't want to lay out the net while you're watching, and so instead he's going to trick you into being tempted so that he can ensnare you in sin. He is smooth as oil. He is sweet as honey. And yet, what happens if we succumb to those temptations? Where does the road lead? Death and hell. Spiritual death, physical death. Those are the two monsters that Jacob warned us about in 2 Nephi chapter 9. And the struggle? Her ways are movable, that thou canst not know them. That's insightful. It's interesting how changeable the world's ways can be. And if he can't get you to fall off one side of the straight and narrow, then he'll trick you into falling off the other. That's why contraries are so important. Balance is required. So which way are you headed? Which woman would you rather marry? Zion or Babylon? Which woman would you rather be raised by? Christ as your father and the church as your mother? Or Satan as your father and the world as your mother? Take your pick. Choice is yours. Another one in Proverbs 5 that I thought was interesting is verse 15. Drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well. Remember back in Deuteronomy and again in Joshua, warning from Moses and Joshua saying, you're going to go into the promised land and live in a city you didn't build, and eat from vineyards you didn't plant, and yes, drink from wells you didn't dig. Well, here's the opposite. The concern there was you're going to forget God because you didn't have to work for anything. Okay? Here, work for it. Dig your own well. Fill your own cistern. On the one hand, you'll know what went into it, and you'll be able to trust it a little bit more because you're the one that put in the work. And to be able to understand that as far as your testimony is concerned, your faith is concerned, yes, we need to seek living waters, but out of a cistern we have cut out for ourselves. What was one of the first phrases from Joseph Smith when he came home from the sacred grove? Mother, I have learned for myself. And when we can stand on our own 2 feet independently, then we are drinking running water out of our very own well. We won't be reliant or dependent on someone else. And since their discipleship is not guaranteed, it's better to have root in yourself, as is said in the parable of the sower, rather than relying upon somebody else's faith or testimony that might not always be there for you. Tap into God directly. He will always be there for you. Proverbs 6 comes next, and interesting one in verse 6, we're going to learn something from the animal kingdom, an insect in this case. Verse 6, go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. If you're a fan of Aesop's fables, which would be wisdom literature from ancient Greece, you know about the ant and the grasshopper. And the grasshopper just wants to live it up, and it'll take care of itself, and it doesn't. Whereas the ant is laboring, is providing meat in the summer, gathering her food in the harvest, so that the ants can make it through times of scarcity. Joseph in Egypt was a good ant and made sure that the 7 years of plenty would prepare them to survive the 7 years of famine. Are we that wise? Are we smarter than a bug, than an insect? Because it would behoove us to watch the ant, and no guide, no overseer, no ruler needed. We do have a guide, overseer, and ruler. We would be wise to listen to his counsel. Verse 9, here's a different one. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Oh, yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that travelleth, and thy want as an armed man. Notice the end there. One that travels, as long as he keeps walking, what's eventually going to happen? He's going to arrive at his destination. Or the other one, an armed man. Well, if he's armed, then of course he's going to accomplish his objective. Well, who's the armed man in this case? Who's the traveler? It's poverty. And where's poverty headed? Straight to you, if you don't get up and actually do something to prepare for him. If you're not working like the ant, if you're not the busy bee, then it's just a matter of time that you'll be struggling. And so, yes, don't run faster than you have strength. And yes, get the right amount of sleep. But if it's a matter of, just a little more, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands. I love the way he dramatizes this. It's almost like he's just coaxing you to stay. Oh, my bed and pillow seem to do that to me every morning. And so ignore it. Get up and be wise. Do something. The next little section, he talks about 7 sins. Now, we famously know of the 7 deadly sins. That's a phrase that's common. But it's not these. The 7 deadly sins were a list that were created by a pope in the Middle Ages. And it's not the same list that we see here in Proverbs. But those ones are worth avoiding as well. The list here, though, starting in 16 and keep going through 19. These 6 things doth the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. And that's a way of phrasing things that comes up every so often in Scripture. If I remember correctly, Amos does it a lot, where he'll say a number and then actually, let me add one more. And it's kind of a literary device to suggest that they're multiplying as we speak. There are 6 things that a 7th just showed up. Great. We're getting worse as we go. And so here's 6 things, never mind, 7 things. Let me list them quickly before number 8 shows up. But here they are. 7 are an abomination unto him. Number 1, a proud look. We've got to overcome our pride. Number 2, a lying tongue. Dishonesty's got to go. Number 3, hands that shed innocent blood. There's our penchant for violence or anger, antipathy. Number 4, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations. That one could be manifest in so many ways. Again, because it's imagination. So let your mind wander. In this case, don't. But wicked imaginations. Number 5, Feet that be swift in running to mischief. It's a great way to describe what are we after, what are we seeking, and are we quick to do iniquity, to run into mischief. Number 6, a false witness that speaketh lies. We already saw a lying tongue earlier, but is there a different nuance here? False witnesses that speak lies. And then number 7, and he that soweth discord among brethren. Again, we saw shedding innocent blood already, but there's a little twist on that one too. It's among brethren, and yet I'm trying to break them up. So it's not just me being violent against them. I want them violent against each other. Discord. Those 7 sins are as deadly as the list that Catholicism created later on. And they're ones that we all need to overcome. And yes, 8, 9, 10, and all the others that are on their way. Near the end of the chapter, Proverbs 6, verse 27, this one's fascinating, especially if you have teenagers to raise and need to talk to them about the law of chastity. If you're in that situation, ask them this: can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth in to his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. Powerful imagery regarding adultery. Hot coals under the feet, burning fire taken into the bosom. If Solomon wrote this, Solomon, son of David and Bathsheba, did he know about the stories of how his parents met? Oh, Solomon wasn't born outside of wedlock, but he had a brother that he never got to know who was. This is tragic, and to understand the metaphor, this is fire you're taking in. So quench the very first beginnings of some kind of burning lust. That's one we have to overcome and fight, because it will consume things. In fact, one of the most powerful quotes on this comes from Will and Ariel Durant, an incredible pair of historians that covered, through their study of the sweep of human history, they realized that some lessons you have to turn to the past to be able to discover, because people throughout time have been burned enough by experience that they've learned to know better. And they're trying to teach the rising generation who isn't old enough to have learned those things for themselves. So with that in mind, the Durants say this: a youth boiling with hormones, and boiling, there's a fire and heat metaphor as well. A youth boiling with hormones will wonder why he should not give full freedom to his sexual desires. But if he is unchecked by custom, morals, or laws, he may ruin his life before he matures sufficiently to understand that sex is a river of fire that must be banked and cooled by 100 restraints if it is not to consume in chaos both the individual and the group. I remember Elder Holland quoting that in a talk he gave at BYU years and years and years ago. And then that same talk that he condensed and gave to an entire church audience in General Conference, 1998, October. I'm not very good at remembering dates, but that one I remember because I just got engaged and was to be married in February of 1999. And so October of 98, with a brand new engagement, you better believe I was focused as Elder Holland spoke of personal purity. And as he warned us all of the river of fire that must be banked and cooled. That phrase has stuck with me ever since. And when my oldest son especially became a teenager and turned 16 and started a date, thankfully even before that, we'd had open conversations. To me it scares me when we mention the talk. Have you had the talk with your child? The fact that that's described in the singular is a huge problem. The fact you could take, the thought that you could take something as complex and something as foundational and important, something so key for life, but with such scary things on the off the straight and narrow path, The fact you could take sexuality and sum it up in one awkward conversation that neither party wants to participate in, that's hugely problematic. So don't make it the talk. Make it the talks. And normalize it enough. With each child one-on-one, I wouldn't do this in the group. We didn't have family home evenings on this, but one-on-one with each child, based so it could be situation specific and child maturity level specific, and what are their feelings and what are your questions, and just it's open. And with my oldest son, we had some great conversations about this, and in one in particular, it was just the right moment. He had come with some questions and some things on his mind, and I said, there's this quote you gotta hear. It's amazing. And we turned to that talk from Elder Holland, and I talked to him about the river of fire that must be banked and cooled by endless restraint. And thankfully, because the time was right and his heart was open, his heart was inclining to wisdom rather than to his own understanding, he internalized that to the point that I'll put it this way, there have been times where he's come to me and talked about sticky situations his friends have found themselves in, or just things in media or movies or whatever, and my son will turn to me and go, banked and cooled. And that's become the code word, the phrase to remind him of virtue and its value, of the need for morality and holding on to it with both hands. I love it when my son just will turn to me with a little twinkle in his eye and go, banked and cooled. Like that person's not banking and cooling, or that's the phrase. And so beware about fire in the bosom. Beware of hot coals beneath the feet. They will consume the individual and the group if they're not banked and cooled by those 100 restraints. Once a teenager understands that, the law of chastity will be a protection that they're grateful for, rather than a rule that annoys them. Turn to Proverbs 7, and we're back to the gendering of wisdom. Verse 4, say unto wisdom, thou art my sister. Call understanding thy kinswoman. We want them to be related to you, because if they are, they'll be able to do the next. That they may keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger that flattereth with her words. That's all that honey and oil we saw in the previous proverb. These strange women trying to lead us away, well, pick which women you're going to associate with. And women of wisdom, sisters of understanding, if you're tied to them tightly enough, they will keep you from wandering down the ways of strange women out there, strange worldly wisdom. In verse 24, later in the chapter, hearken unto me now therefore, O ye children. Again, that sense of how inexperienced his audience is. We don't know any better, and so we'd be wise to listen to the wisdom of our elders. Attend to the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways. Go not astray in her paths, for she hath cast down many wounded. Yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. Are we starting to see this theme develop in this book? Death and hell, there it is again. Wisdom versus worldly ways. And it's the seductive nature of those sins, the tantalization of temptation. And even if you're strong to the point of thinking, I would never fall to that, be careful, especially if you haven't seen the adversary lay out the net. Because even strong men, many of them, again, is Solomon thinking of David, many strong men have been slain by her. And Solomon, you'll be one of them yourself, as you got pulled away by these strange women and their stranger gods. Compare all of that to chapter 8, and this is where we meet the ultimate gendering of wisdom to the point of personifying her as a mother in heaven. Now, some would simply leave that as metaphor, as figurative language. And so if we're going to gender wisdom, fine, let's exalt her at the same time. And exalted wisdom, which we will name Sophia, there's the Greek term for wisdom, feminine, and so Sophia then becomes the embodiment of wisdom. And it's one that you want to claim as a sister, or better yet, marry as a spouse. This is a match made in heaven. But again, thankfully, because our theology allows us to understand the reality of a mother in heaven, rather than just a metaphoric mother, a literal one. Truth is wisdom, truth eternal tells me I have a mother there. Well, Proverbs chapter 8 is a message from her. A message from Mother Wisdom. And if we can allow this description of Sophia, we don't know the name of our mother in heaven, but if we can see Sophia in this case as emblematic of her, then I think we'll come to understand her a little bit better. And talk about third shelf revelations yet to come. A greater understanding of our Heavenly Mother is one I can't wait to receive, though I'm patient in the meantime until the Lord chooses to reveal it. We're going to read a lot of Proverbs 8. It's worth it. Look at verse 1. Doth not wisdom cry, and understanding put forth her voice? Wisdom is calling to you. Will you hear her? Will you respond? Will you come? This is what she says, verse 10. Receive my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. We'll see by Proverbs 31, our final proverb chapter, which is also focused on women, we'll see rubies appear in that chapter as well. That virtue is better than rubies. And here, wisdom is better than rubies as well. Put virtue and wisdom together, and that's a match made in heaven as well. And now Solomon would know that because he has plenty of both. He's got plenty of gold and plenty of silver and plenty of rubies, but he valued wisdom over it all. So should we. Verse 17 is next. I love them that love me, Mother Wisdom would say. And those that seek me early shall find me. Riches and honor are with me, yea, durable riches and righteousness. Do we love wisdom like that? Enough to defer to her whenever we have to make a choice? Do we realize that the riches that she offers us are durable? It's a great word. Where moth and rust doth not corrupt. Oh, that's wisdom in heaven. And if we can have it descend to guide us on earth, then it will lead us back home at last. Then verse 22. And this is where Mother Wisdom really begins to speak about herself. This is where Sophia introduces herself to her would-be children, if we'll but choose her. And again, if we can think about Father in heaven sealed to Mother in heaven, and the two of them collectively behind creation and the presentation of the plan of salvation, behind the first lessons we received in our premortal world of spirits, that's what section 138 of the Doctrine and Covenants lets us know. Then notice this introduction, verse 22. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. This is wisdom as God's partner in premortality. Here's Sophia right alongside Elohim. I was set up from everlasting, she says, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills was I brought forth. It's almost like she's walking us through the days of creation, and we see sea divided from land. We see the mountains emerge. But even before that, if you will rewind the tape from before the foundation of the world, like I said, when the plan was presented, who else was there among those noble and great ones that Abraham was shown in vision? She was there. Wisdom was there. And again, I know so many commentators throughout history have simply let this remain on the figurative level. And of course, God had wisdom before the earth was created, because God is wise, and eternally so. So yes, this could just be an amazing kind of poetic image of a wise father. But our theology allows it to be so much more than that. The Lord possessed me. Well, better than possess. He partnered with me. And I was his and he was mine. And I love them that love me. Well, the Father loves her and she loves the Father. And together, these are parents trying to raise their children to be noble and great like them. In verse 26, while as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust of the world, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he gave to the sea his decree that the water should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth. Again, this is our quick review of creation itself, all of which is preceded by the presence of wisdom herself. It actually makes me think of Job. And remember those chapters when God machine gun fired all those questions at him, none of which Job could answer? What did they all revolve around? Creation. And remember when he said it early on, where were you when I planned all of this? Where were you when the sons of God shouted for joy, when the morning stars sang together, when all of my children rejoiced in the plan I presented? Where were you? Well, if you couple those chapters from Job with Proverbs chapter 8, who else was there among the sons of God and the morning stars? Well, the ultimate morning star herself, Mother Wisdom. And it's almost like the Lord is, again, channel Job through Proverbs 8, and it's as if God is saying, Job, don't you remember who else was there? I'm asking, were you there? The answer is yes, though the veil has made you forget it. But who else was there? Not just the sons of God shouting, and not just the daughters of God singing, but wisdom herself was there as well. And we're sealed. We possess one another. We are in full partnership with one another. And so all these chapters that you've been wrestling with me and wanting to sue me for malpractice and call me out on my lack of wisdom? Are you serious, Job? My lack of wisdom? Like I don't know what I'm doing? The universe works. Creation is accomplished, whether or not you understand its inner workings. I'm sealed to wisdom. So don't question my possession of it. Don't wonder or worry that I don't know what I'm doing, because I am sealed, eternally sealed to understanding. If Job can trust his heavenly parents, then life will go well for him. And the same is true for all of us. She, Mother Wisdom, goes on in verse 30. Then, in premortality, I was by him, as one brought up with him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the habitable part of the earth, and my delights were with the sons of men. I told you it was a match made in heaven. By him, with him, daily his delight. There's never a moment where God is not wise. Never a moment where omnipotence, which I think stereotypically we would gender masculine, is not eternally sealed with omniscience, which at least in Proverbs 8, is gendered feminine. Now, we're proving contraries, right? And remember what Harold B. Lee's daughter said, I'm always grateful my parents. I was raised by a father who was gentle beneath his firmness and a mother that was firm beneath her gentleness. They both had both halves. It wasn't just you got this and dad has this and mom has this. No, mom and dad both have each other's attributes. And that's important to understand too, eternally. But powerful, powerful phrase. If we recognize them as an eternal pair, as co-equal, as co-eternal, daily delight, that describes a celestial marriage if I've ever seen one. Now, after all of those verses in which she establishes her ethos, in rhetorical studies there's pathos, ethos, and logos. And logos is the what you're trying to convey. Okay, it's your argument, it's the word, it's the truth. Pathos is the feeling with which you give, that you explain it, okay? And so you're working upon the emotion. If logos is working upon the mind, pathos is working upon the emotion. Where does that leave ethos? Ethos is the speaker and their authority. And do I trust them at all? Do I trust in the Lord with all my heart, or do I lean toward my own understanding, or in my case, my own misunderstanding? Well, Mother Wisdom, Sophia, has established her ethos. I've been around since before the beginning. If you believe in God, believe in me. And then she asks us to accept her message. Verse 32, now therefore hearken unto me, O ye children, for blessed are they that keep my ways. If you know who I am and who I've always been, if you trust the wisdom of God, then hearken, keep the commandments, keep covenant, turn to the Scripture, know that God is the way, the truth, and the life. So follow the way and trust the truth and live the life. And you'll come back to be with us. You'll actually come back to be like us. And that's been our goal from the beginning. We'll finish this chapter with verse 33 through 36. One more invitation to us all. Hear instruction and be wise and refuse it not. Blessed is the man that heareth me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the posts of my doors. Can you picture that? Just eager to catch a glimpse or receive any word of instruction. For whoso findeth me findeth life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. But he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death. So in that passage, wisdom and life are synonymous. And foolishness and death are synonymous as well. So when Moses says, I have set before thee life and death, wherefore choose life, the writer of Proverbs is setting before us wisdom and foolishness. Well, that should be an easy choice for us to make as well. And then the rest of this book, Mother Wisdom will be teaching us. The rest of this book we will hear from her. Chapter 9, she's still personified as a woman, but this time she's doing things that typically are associated with men. She's building a house, construction, giving us a place, shelter from the elements. Then she sets the table, she sends forth her maidens, and she invites all of us to come to the feast. That seems to be more of a motherly thing to do in this case. But verse 5, come, eat of my bread. It's the bread of life, after all. And drink of the wine which I have mingled. Now, where do we usually associate bread and wine? How can you picture the learning of truth, the gaining of wisdom as a sacramental act? If the glory of God is intelligence, or in other words, light and truth, then gaining that kind of intelligence then is a worshipful, sacramental thing. So come, take my bread and wine. In verse 8, here's an example of that wisdom. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate thee. On the other hand, rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee. That goes back to the idea of being teachable and coachable. Seek feedback from someone you trust. Ask honestly for their opinion. I used to do this with my seminary students, or my institute students, and I'd keep it anonymous so they could be brutally honest. And I'd pass out 3x5 cards at the end of a semester and say, on one side, will you tell me something I'm doing well so I don't change that? And on the other side, please be honest, tell me something you wish I would change since I'm not doing it that well. And I got some amazing feedback. It's a wise man that is looking for it because it will help them improve. Rebuke a wise man, wisdom says. Oh, he's going to love you for it. Okay? It lets you know, by the way, if you flip it around. If you, again, reproving betimes with sharpness, when moved upon by the Holy Ghost, and showing an increase of love, you don't have to do this in a mean-spirited way, and thankfully my students didn't either. But if I take that and appreciate that feedback, then guess what I am, according to this verse? I'm wise, because I'm open to it. And yes, I love the people who give it to me. It's for my benefit. How about this one in verse 17 and 18? Totally unrelated to what we just discussed, but that's okay. We're going to be jumping all over the place, right? Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. Hello, that's a pretty stark ending. But think about it. Stolen water, ooh, that's sweet. The bread you sneak away and eat in hiding in secret, oh, that's pleasant, all right. But talk about a bad aftertaste. If that's where it leads, the depths of hell, then no thanks. Remember that great phrase back in Numbers chapter 32, verse 23? Be sure your sin will find you out. Oh, yeah, it will. You may have stolen that water and drunk it sweetly, but you'll be found out. And yes, the bread you may have eaten in secret, and it was so pleasant, but someone will ultimately know. So beware of that. Repent. In Proverbs 10, how about this one? Verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. We're associating these wise sayings with him, and here's one for you. A wise son maketh a glad father, but, here's the flip side, a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. And like I said before, this is the typical form for the majority of Proverbs in ancient Israel. That's the way they would phrase things. This is good, but that is bad. So be wise enough to compare and contrast and pick the better side. This chapter is our first real example of just how frequent this form will be followed. There are 32 verses in Proverbs 10. 26 of them follow this pattern. This is good, but that is bad, so make your choice. Here's an example. Verse 7. The memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? You want to be remembered for good or for evil? Or this one, 21. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. I love that one because I'm a teacher. And so the power of teaching and learning, that if you are trying to live the gospel, then as you speak, the words that come out of your mouth will feed many. In fact, they will be loaves and fishes that are multiplied so that the multitudes get to feast on what you're sharing. That's what wisdom's all about. That any of you that have the blessing of being able to teach, then your lips are feeding many. How about this one? This one follows the same form. Verse 27, the fear of the Lord prolongeth days. We saw that earlier, right? Length of days and long life. But, here's the flip side, the years of the wicked shall be shortened. That's Alaska during the winter time. Short days and really, really long nights. I don't know if I can go back up there during that time. Now turn the page in Proverbs 11. Here's more of these, this is good, but that is bad. 20 out of our 31 verses will follow that. And here's a handful for you. Verse 1, a false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. That one reversed it. This is bad, but this one's good. Are we honest in our dealings with our fellow man? It's a Temple Recommend interview question, right? And so do we have a just weight or a false balance? Are we trying to keep things equal and even and fair, or are we adjusting things so it always comes out in our favor? That's not a wise way to live. Verse 13, here's some more counsel. A talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. Now, I'm not saying to conceal things that ought to be shared, because that's the rebuke of the righteous that you should be loved for. But in this case, what do we do with gossip when it comes to us? Does it stop in its tracks when we're the next one that's being passed on to? That, no, I'm not going to pass this one on. I'm a faithful spirit, and I don't want to hurt people's feelings by spreading these false rumors. On the other hand, a talebearer, they're the ones that take the gossip and speed it up and send it out in as many different directions as they can. And that's a problem. Verse 14, here's another problem. Where no counsel is, the people fall. But, other side, in the multitude of counselors there is safety. There is value in a multitude of counselors. I mean, in the church, we typically have at least 2 if we're in leadership positions. And that's good. That way it's an odd number, and how are we going to get majority rule and come to unanimity? And I need some disagreement in hopes that we can prove some contraries and get to a better view of the truth. Multitude of counselors. President Ballard talks often about counseling with our counsels. And again, if we're not leaning unto our own understanding, then turn to the wisdom of those around you. And definitely turn to the Lord and trust in Him, since He won't lead you astray ever. So good advice to take advice. Then verse 22, this is woman for 200, Alex. As a jewel of gold in a swine's snout, so is a fair woman which is without discretion. My seminary boys loved this one. But again, flip it around, and a fair man who is without discretion is no more beautiful than a jewel of gold in a swine's snout either. Great visual image there, right? I mean, if you were to, this would be a fun one to do visually, where you have the camera's zoomed in, so really all you see is this golden jewel against some strange pink background. I don't know what it is, but if the jewel is all that captures my eye, it's amazing. I want that more than anything. Well, careful. Let's zoom out slowly. And then as you slowly extend the view and start to get the big picture, what you thought was so appealing, it doesn't look quite so attractive anymore. And that's so often the case when it comes to falling in love with somebody's exterior. And you're just caught up with what you see from the beginning. But if you were to back up and get past the beautiful person or the shiny object, what are they really like down deep? And if this woman or man is without discretion, without virtue, without discernment, without wisdom, then no thanks. Yes, the jewel was beautiful, but the swine's snout, that kind of didn't do it for me. We're moving on. In verse 24, another great piece of wisdom. There is that scattereth, and yet increaseth. And there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. Now, that's not how it should work, right? If you scatter your goods, you tend to lose out. You don't have them anymore. You've given them all out, distributed too much. And on the flip side, if you withhold and keep it all to yourself, there's Ebenezer Scrooge, then that's how you get wealthy, right? Well, the world would tell you that, but God disagrees. And as far as God is concerned, haven't you noticed some people that just keep giving, and yet somehow, I don't know how they end up with anything left for themselves, but, I guess now I do. God keeps blessing them because He knows that it's like you've short-circuited the pride cycle. And you don't flip over from prosperity to pride and wickedness. You just keep staying humble, you keep being generous, and God just keeps blessing you. On the flip side, that is the pride cycle personified. They hoard it all to themselves, and yet they keep shriveling smaller and smaller and don't seem to have all that they've been holding on to. I think you see a similar principle in verse 25. The liberal soul shall be made fat. This is fat in a good way, and prospered. And he that watereth shall be watered also himself. It's a great principle. If I will water others, God will water me. If I turn my hose on the neighbor's lawn, maybe God will let it rain on mine. And there's some value there. I remember once when I was teaching at the MTC, I had a district that was struggling with their Spanish. They all seem to. It's hard. And I remember one day, early on in our time together, and they were still getting to know each other as companions and as a district, and there was some struggles, some friction. And at the end of the day of class, I said to one missionary, Elder, you're struggling with Spanish, aren't you? Yeah. I said, can can I just guess what you probably pray for, like every time you're on your knees? He said, go for it. I said, you're probably praying that God will help you with your Spanish. C. Oh, see, it's working already. Good job. Yes. C. You're probably praying that you're not so homesick. Oh, yeah. You're probably praying to get used to missionary life and be able to handle a schedule. Probably praying to get along with your companion. Sorry, companion. Yeah, I'm trying. And I kind of went through the list. And I'm not a prophet. I'm not reading his mind. I had just been a missionary, and I knew what a missionary needed. That was me. Those are the exact prayers that I offered years before. And then I said to the rest of the district, to the other 11, is that what all of you are praying for too? And 12 heads were all nodding in unison. I said, can we try an experiment? Since you all are struggling in the same areas, and you're more or less, and you're all praying for essentially the same blessings, since you all need them, let's try this experiment. Instead of asking God that he bless you with all of those things, pray that God will bless your fellow missionaries with those things. Don't even ask for anything yourself. Starting tonight in your prayers, plead with God that he'll bless the members of your district. And then trust that they're doing the same for you. Now, the same kinds of blessings are what we're seeking, but what's different about the approach? In the old way, you had one prayer being offered on your behalf, and it was yours. So in a way, it was a little bit selfish. You had good motives. Don't worry, I'm not calling you out. But this way, you now have 11 selfless prayers being offered in your behalf. And I'm sure your mom and dad are doing that for you already, so count them too. You understand what I'm getting at? And that district began to do just that. It was a beautiful thing to see. And to watch missionaries watering others, it was amazing to watch their grass grow because God was watering them. I believe in that principle. I think there's something powerful to it. Turning to Proverbs 12, here's a few more powerful principles. 25 out of these 28 verses are this is good, but that is bad constructions. So we're following that pattern. Verse 4, a virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. Now that can be flipped around, and the same would be true for a virtuous man, but in a way this is a preview of what we'll see in Proverbs 31, where we get the bulk of a chapter dedicated to a virtuous woman. Yes, crown to her husband and crown to everyone else she meets. In verse 10, a righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Think about that one. If you're righteous, you even take good care of your animals. If you're wicked, then what seems to look like taking good care is actually probably self-centered. There's probably a catch to it. It's probably more about the person than the person doing it than the person being done for. And so, no, I don't even trust the tender mercies of the wicked. Chances are they're not that tender or that merciful. Interesting proverb. In some ways we could say good people treat animals like people, and bad people treat people like animals. How's that for a reversal? Let's look at verse 18. There is that speaketh like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health. There's quite a few proverbs about how we use our words. Are we feeding the multitudes? We saw that already. This one, are we healing or are we hurting? And I pray that my words give health to people. I always try to be careful not to pierce anyone with my sword. God's word is a sharp sword. It's personified by that in the book of Revelation, in the Doctrine and Covenants. It's a sharp two-edged sword. It heals those who need it. It hurts those that need to be rebuked. So we need to be careful with what we say to people and how we say it. Proverbs 13, following the same pattern, 22 out of 25 are this is good, but that is bad. Verse 7, there is that maketh himself rich, yet hath nothing. And on the other hand, there is that maketh himself poor, yet hath great riches. Similar to the proverb we already saw. But it reminds me of a conversation I had with my kids. We were driving in our old beat-up minivan one day, and they said, Dad, are we rich? And how do you answer that? And I smiled and said, well, there's two kinds of rich, kids. There's rich in money and there's rich in love. And if you could only pick one of those, which would you pick? And they all chimed in unison, oh, rich in love. I'm like, awesome. In that case, we are loaded. We are rich in love. And that satisfied them for a time until a few minutes had passed in silence. And one of them must have been thinking about it because they piped up and said, Dad, is it wrong to be rich in both ways? You could just see what was going on in their little mind. I said, no, it's not at all. But again, if you could only pick one, just make sure you choose the right one. And that proverb seems to suggest the right one. Verse 10, only by pride cometh contention, but with the well-advised is wisdom. Contention only comes by pride? President Benson would back that up. It's enmity, as he defined it. It's oppositionality. It's friction between people. So what is the ultimate peacemaker? It's humility. That's what allows you to turn the other cheek. It allows you to give the other person the benefit of the doubt. It's the lubricant of love that helps smooth the friction that would otherwise take place. Verse 19, I love this one because I'm a pragmatist and I try to be productive as often as I can. The desire accomplished is sweet to the soul, but it is abomination to fools to depart from evil. Now, that's not a very good parallelism. Solomon, not one of your best, because the second half doesn't really seem to give the converse of the first half. But that's okay. I'll take the first half, because it's a great description of reaching a goal. And if you'll set goals and work toward them, then the desire accomplished, it is sweet. If we can help our children sense and taste that sweetness, perhaps they'll be able to be more self-motivated as they move toward their own goals. How about this one, verse 24? This one's really famous. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. Now, we've seen Proverbs already that suggest that course correction is a good sign of love. But again, it's how is that course correction being offered? That's why I turned you to Doctrine and Covenants 121. That reproving betimes with sharpness when moved upon by the Holy Ghost. And sharpness isn't anger, it's clarity. Okay, sharpness on the TV, right? No blurry lines. I'm just trying to be as crystal clear with you as possible. But it's the Spirit that's moving me to do it, and it's love that's behind everything I'm saying. In fact, I'm going to crank up the love as soon as this conversation, I don't have to wait. I'm cranking up the love as we speak so that you know that I'm doing this for your good. I'm not venting. There are times where we are moved upon by something when we reprove. But if it's not by the Spirit, if it's anger, if it's frustration, if it's bitterness, if it's disappointment, then we shouldn't be giving the advice that we would give. Wait, cool off, approach it from a better angle, in a better spirit. And so if you're sparing your rod and hating your son, you see, the problem is through much of human history, the rod was taken literally in this verse. And this is my stick. And this is what I'm going to use to punish. This is the paddle. My grandma used to use a fly swatter back in the day. And if you're thinking, well, they got to turn out and I'm going to use this stick and physically assault my children, that's something we have to be I'll put it this way. What rod are we talking about? Remember the 23rd Psalm? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What was said about the shepherd's rod and staff in that beautiful psalm? They comfort me because they gently pull me back onto the path when I start to wander. Or more forcefully, they're the ones that keep the wolves at bay. Well, can our counsel keep the wolves of the world away from our children? Yes. So use that one with strength. But if I'm trying to gently correct my child, then do it gently so that our rod will comfort them. Or maybe even better yet, take Lehi's dream. And what rod comes to mind then? Ah, the rod of iron, the word of God. And yes, if I spare my children that rod, if I don't teach them the word, then I'm hating them. Because I'm not doing what love would require. So please do not spare the word of God. That is a comforting staff. That is a comforting rod. And our children need it. Chapter 14. Here's more. This is good, but that is bad formulations. 27 out of 35 verses, to be precise. I'll just share a few. Verse 1, every wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish plucketh it down with her hands. And this one I love because it's talking about a wise woman. Now we saw wisdom gendered female earlier, but this is not gendering wisdom. This is talking about a gendered woman who happens to be wise. And I love that we're speaking of a sister, a woman who's building her house and thus showing her wisdom, as opposed to a foolish woman who's plucking hers down. All I'm saying is that not every verse needs to be male-oriented. Okay? These are intended for God's daughters as much as for God's sons. Now this one was intended for me, but I'll share it with you. Verse 4. Where no oxen are, the crib is clean, but much increase is by the strength of the ox. Now that one's weird, I'll confess. This one needs this is one of those dark sayings, the enigma that needs a little interpretation. Now I'm not a farm boy, but I know barns enough to realize that if there's no animals living in it, I'll bet it stays clean. Because what is it that leaves barns looking not so good and smelling not so sweet? Well, it's those animals. And the stereotypical chore for a farm kid of mucking the stalls and going in and cleaning out the nastiness, well, that's disgusting work. And can you picture a child a farm kid going to the farm parent and saying, I got a good solution. I wouldn't have to muck the stalls if no one was living in them. But those nasty animals, they're making my work hard. Good point, son or daughter. But do you have any idea how much hard work those animals do for this farm? Or would you rather be the one pulling the plow yourself? You thought mucking the stall was hard? That's nothing compared to what the animal is doing itself. So yes, the crib would be clean. The crib is the stall. It would be clean if there was no ox there. But I'm so grateful for what the ox can provide by way of strength, that the increase far outweighs the difficulty of cleaning up after it. Now, why did I say that this applies to me when I'm not a farmer? Well, because I'm a parent. And I could say the same, that where no children are, the house is clean and quiet and calm, but much increase is by the presence of children. Are children a burden or a blessing? Yes. But that added burden is far outweighed by the added blessing, the increase of joy and happiness and love and purpose, meaning. Of my family, I'm the cleanest one. And I don't say that pridefully. It's probably some OCD on my part. I just like to have things organized. My dad said when he got home from work when I was a little kid, all of the knickknacks on the mantle were reorganized and made symmetrical by descending height order. And he just laughed and said, I think Jared was here. So I guess that had been manifest from an early age. And I just kind of like a place for everything and everything in its place. And I just like to keep things organized. And that's not the case with children by nature, typically, unless they came with that nature. And I don't think I passed that one down. That gene stayed with me. And so this is a verse that I sometimes have to remind myself of. And then go, oh, dirty cribs. It's okay. Much increase. And I'm grateful for it. Maybe some of you out there need that verse as well. If not, thanks for letting me share something that's helped me. Verse 15. The simple believeth every word, but the prudent man looketh well to his going. That one's pretty simple and straightforward, but I like it. Don't be gullible, is the advice it gives to me. Verse 34, I like this one too. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. There's an old saying in American history. Most people tend to associate it with Alexis de Tocqueville, although there's no evidence he actually ever said it. So maybe we're just attributing it to him, like many of these proverbs are simply attributed to Solomon. But according to the old saying, it says that America will cease to be great once she ceases to be good. And I love de Tocqueville. Democracy in America is a classic read, but I don't need him to tell me that statement for me to believe in it. That one I do believe in. And our greatness, any nation, not just America, greatness depends on goodness. And so righteousness exalts a nation. I hope it's exalting ours, or wherever you live. Proverbs 15 has 33 verses. 22 of them are this is good, but that is bad constructions. I'll just give you a few. Verse 1, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. That first half is a very famous phrase. I just wish we lived it as often as we quoted it. And when people were angry, we responded in softness, because it gives them a chance to be soft as well. Too often it's escalating one up after the other, and they were mad, so I can be mad back. I'm justified. And now they're justified in getting madder, and we just keep intensifying. Whereas if they're angry and we don't get angry in return, it almost jolts them into like, wait a minute, am I being a jerk here? Because if they were just a jerk back, then I would have felt totally justified. But since they're not, I'm only looking at myself, and I think I better back off a little bit. And then that soft answer turns away wrath. In verse 8, the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. Now notice what's being given in the first half versus the second half. First half was sacrifice. Second half was prayer. Just prayer, we might say, since it seems so much easier than actually bringing the ox or the sheep or the ram. But what does God prefer? It's how it's done, the spirit in which it's given. Because if that sacrifice, an entire ox even, if it's from the wicked, then God doesn't accept it. It's an abomination to him. Whereas if all you have is a widow's mite equivalent of prayer, but it's done in sincerity by the righteous, the upright, then God delights in it. Just like Jesus delighted in that widow. In verse 16, better is little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. Now this one sounds very similar to the one we just studied. What's better, right? The big sacrifice or the little prayer? Well, forget about that. It's how it's done and who it's being done by. Similarly here. The second half of it is the more famous. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox if hatred's coming along with it. And can you imagine coming home and smells good, Mom, what's for dinner? Smells like basil. It's like, yeah, that's what's for dinner. What basil on what? No, just the basil. That's all we got. Oh, it's okay. I sure love you, and you love me, and the basil is going to taste delicious as we just share. It's not going to get in the way of the conversation. We'll be able to eat quickly and then just hang out together, as opposed to what's on the menu next door. Oh, a stalled ox? We got the fatted calf. But if it's between an older brother and a younger prodigal and they're at odds and enmity, no wonder Dad came out and tried to calm everybody down, or calm older brother down, because we got the stalled ox. We just don't want any hatred therewith. So more important than the menu is the manners between the people that have come for the meal. Proverbs 16 is next, and here we go away from that normal formulation of this is good, but that is bad. We'll see 2 more chapters near the end of the book, 28 and 29, that get back to that construction. But now we're going to just be more, again, pithy proverbs, wise adages that hopefully will make sense to us. Here's a few worth studying in chapter 16. Verse 1, the preparations of the heart in man and the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Now, as a teacher, I'm grateful for that. Because when I'm opening my mouth and speaking, my tongue, it gives answers, but they're not from me, they're from the Lord, and I'm grateful for that. And then the flip side, the preparations of the heart, that's from the Lord too. Some people are really good at preparation that struggle with presentation, and other people are really good at presentation but don't want to pay the price of preparation. And here both sides are there, and both sides deserve, or God deserves the glory. And I hope that we turn to Him and offer that praise and that gratitude. It's from the Lord. Remember those great promises that treasure up continually the words of life, and then take no thought what you shall say, for it shall be given you in the very moment, that portion that shall be meted to every man. That passage has both parts as well. It's open your mouth and it shall be filled, but it's also treasure up continually the words of life. And if God is there for your preparation, then of course He'll be there for your presentation. Trust that He's with you all the way through. They both should be and can be Spirit directed. Verse 17, this one's a little bit odd. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He that keepeth his way preserveth his soul. The word that struck me in that was highway, because we talk about the righteous walking on straight and narrow paths, right? So if we talk about the path of the righteous is straight and narrow, because it's following the commandments, it's seeking wisdom in every set of circumstances, and how much justice versus how much mercy, and I'm trying to balance, and I'm walking a narrow way. But when it comes to departing from evil, because that's the phrase that's used here, if the upright is departing from evil, that's a straight up highway. That's like a 10-lane super freeway, and just pedal to the metal and get out of there as quickly as you can. In many ways, departing from evil is not straight and it's not narrow. It's you're leaving the wide roads, and so you still have a lot of lanes to just get out as quickly as you can. It'll get narrower later on, but don't worry, you'll have time to merge. Okay, other people will even yield and let you come in, because it's the path of the righteous, and we want to make room for everybody. Okay. How about verse 18? Another very famous phrase. We phrase it a little differently, but this is where it comes from. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. Remember, in Hebrew poetry, often it's parallel phrases, lines that are repeated. We'll see more of that next week when we get to Isaiah. I can hardly wait to start Isaiah with you. We'll learn about Hebrew poetry, but this is a good example of it. Pride goeth before destruction. Now let me say that again in different words. A haughty spirit before a fall. Now, the way we typically phrase it in the English-speaking world is we just have kind of combined the two and shortened it. We don't want to rhyme. We just want one and done. And so what do we say? Pride goeth before the fall. And that sums up that verse perfectly. And it's true. Pride does. If you fall and look back a bit and realize, oh yeah, I kind of set myself up for that, didn't I? I think there was a story, I think it was about Heber J. Grant, if I remember correctly. He was an incredibly young stake president and was nervous and didn't feel qualified for it. That's like Moses, like Enoch, like everybody, right? Gideon, you name them. Anyway, the first time he had to speak at a conference alongside an apostle, he was scared to death, but so humbly he took the stand, and the Lord opened his mouth and filled it. And presentation was of the Lord, right? And it was amazing. And this young Heber J. Grant was so grateful and relieved and in awe of it all. But then later, feeling like, okay, I got this. I guess I'm better at speaking than I thought. He goes and tries again and crashes and burns. To the point that when he sat down with his tail between his legs, the apostle with him leans over and says something along the lines of, if you would have gone up the way you came down, you would have come down the way you went up. In other words, you went up with confidence, pride in fact, and came down totally devastated. If you would have gone up in humility, you would have come down with confidence, like the last time. There's another example of pride going before the fall. He fell because he started with pride. We need to start with humility, and we'll rise as a result. Another famous one, verse 32. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. Yes, self-discipline and self-control are needed. I mean, this is military imagery, right? Taking a city, there's somebody conquering an enemy. Well, the enemy usually lies within. And if we can wage and win that war, oh, there's conquest for you. It's becoming who we need to become. And that's a battle worth fighting. Proverbs 17, a good handful of wonderful Proverbs. Verse 1, better is a dry morsel and quietness therewith than an house full of sacrifices with strife. That's similar to the stalled ox versus herb dinner that we saw on the menu a little bit earlier. And if this is Solomon speaking, then he has every right to say it. Coming from a man with 700 wives and 300 concubines, you want to talk about a house full of sacrifices with strife? Can I just eat a dry morsel by myself sometime? Verse 6, children's children are the crown of old men, and the glory of children are their fathers. Oh, those are the joys of a happy family life. And I do love the focus on grandkids, children's children, crown of old men. I'm sensing that from my father and my father-in-law. Or how about verse 10? A reproof entereth more into a wise man than 100 stripes into a fool. What does it take for you to learn from your mistakes? Just a gentle correction, a reproof, in which case, I did do that wrong. And I see why I got into that mess. Thank you. I love you for loving me enough to correct me. As opposed to the fool that you kind of, again, this is the rod in the wrong way, but 100 stripes and you keep beating them for their mistakes. This is corporal punishment, and yet it doesn't seem to do a thing. That's foolishness all the way down. Yeah, verse 12, let a bear robbed of her whelps meet a man rather than a fool in his folly. Now, if we think about the stereotypical angry mama bear, and the way the writer of Proverbs is suggesting this one, man, I would rather run into an angry mama bear out in the woods somewhere than have to stumble across the path of an absolute fool. A fool in his folly is even more dangerous. Verse 17, I love this one. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Have you noticed that it's in hard times that you really find out who your friends are? And it's in hard times that your family really is the one that comes through for you. I've heard a good definition of family are the people who put up with you when no one else will. Or the people who come to your rescue when no one else wants to. That is a good definition of family and a good definition of friends. A brother born for adversity. That's what I'm here for. That's why we're flesh and blood. Verse 22, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. And we often say in English that laughter is the best medicine. Well, here's the ancient Hebrew equivalent. There's power in a positive attitude. Merry heart. Or verse 28, even a fool when he holdeth his peace is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. That one's kind of fun. That if you'll just be quiet, even a fool might be mistaken as somebody wise because they haven't made it obvious just how foolish they are down deep. There's actually an old saying that some attribute to Abraham Lincoln and others attribute to Mark Twain. We're actually not sure who said it. If either of those ever actually did, I don't know. But who started it, we're not sure. But it sounds like something that Twain or Lincoln would say. It says, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. And that is essentially what we just saw in Proverbs 17:28. Well, how about Proverbs 18? Verse 9 says that he also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster. So don't be either one. If you're not working or if you're wasting, either way you're losing out. And the way we put it is a penny saved is a penny earned. Same kind of idea. If I'm not wasting that penny, then and I've saved it, in other words, then it's as if I just earned another penny. Because it would have been gone if I would have wasted it. So careful there among the slothful or the wasteful. Verse 13, He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. We speak of don't jump to conclusions. And that's good advice. If we weigh in on the case even before court has been called into order, then we're not a very good judge. I've heard some people call it the 24-hour rule. When I hear something, I wait for 24 hours before I make a decision because I don't want to go based on my emotional reaction to the situation. Others will say, well, there's two sides to every story, so make sure you hear the opposite before you weigh in on just the one-sided view that you have. There's another great proverb in verse 19, fairly well known. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. If you've ever been home teacher or visiting teacher or ministering brother or sister to someone who's been inactive for a long time, and inactive because someone offended them, then you understand the reality of that proverb. That a brother offended, it's harder to be won than a strong city because the walls are up. They got burned at some point, and they were open, and there weren't walls, and someone offended them, and now the walls are up, and I can't get around them. That's a hard thing to do, and to be able to reassure people that not everyone's like that, and hopefully help them get over that being offended, and realize that, unfortunately, you're letting the person who offended you, you're letting them win. Because somehow they keep offending you, because now every single week they're keeping you from church. Throughout, day after day, they are keeping. You're going to let them stand between you and God? That's devastating. I feel bad for you that you were offended, but I feel even worse for you that offense is not just keeping me out, but keeping healing out, keeping God out. We got to get over it. And on the flip side, if we're the one that is offensive, that is something we really need to overcome. It's a great line in the New Testament where Jesus says, it must needs be that offenses shall come, but woe be unto him through whom the offenses come. In other words, yeah, there's going to be jerks out there, but don't be that jerk. There's going to be hard friction and hard sayings and things that just rub people the wrong way. But don't be the type of person that goes around offending people. Think about what you're going to say. More importantly, think about what they're going to hear and how it might come across. And be a little more careful about hurting people's feelings. We could all use some caution in that area. Verse 22, here's another one. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord. Back in Genesis we saw that it is not good for man to be alone, and not good for woman to be alone either. I love this one though. You found yourself a spouse? Well, congratulations. You found yourself a good thing. Proverbs 19. Here's some other good things for you. Verse 6. Many will entreat the favor of the prince, and every man is a friend to him that giveth gifts. Remember the way Jesus teaches this in the Sermon on the Mount? That if you only love those that love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? Even a publican can respond in kind. I've sometimes joked with my wife about what we call parental publicanism. As I've thought, I'm patient with children that don't require my patience. There I am, parental publican. It's easy to be patient with kids that don't require patience. It's easy to befriend someone if they're giving you gifts all the time. I'll be careful then. Are we willing to give gifts with no expectation of return? Or turn it around. Am I willing to befriend someone that isn't giving me gifts at all? There's something powerful about that in terms of social gifts. But befriending this person doesn't elevate me at all because they're not looked up to, they're not respected. No, I want to have popular friends because that makes me popular. Wow, every man is friend to him who giveth gifts. But to find someone, quote unquote, beneath you on the social scale, that have none of those visible gifts to give your gifts to them, and you will realize that they have incredible gifts to give you in return. You just didn't know that when you began the relationship. That's a good piece of advice as well. Verse 17 is next. He that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again. It's a great statement. If you have pity on the poor, you're lending to the Lord. Unpack that and see what he's saying. Because when you lend someone something, they return it. And often they return it with increase, if it's a bank, or they return it with cookies, if it's a neighbor, or return it with a willingness to continue give and return and lend to you whenever you need it. Well, if I'm giving to the poor, who am I lending to? Not to the poor, because they can't pay me back anyway. I'm lending to the Lord, and boy, can he pay me back with increase. Now, again, the fact that it's a loan and that you're a third party, or in some ways, the Lord is the third party, the way that it's phrased. That I'm here giving to the poor. I'm providing fast offerings, just whatever thing I can donate to other people, give to other people, serve other people. And if I'm in a position where they can't pay me back, that's when the Lord steps in as a third party and blesses us. But I didn't do anything for you. Oh, yeah, you did. You loaned me something. How? Well, who usually provides for the poor? Since no one else seems willing to do it, well, God does. And somehow he puts bread on the table and keeps people going. It's one of the reasons that the poor are often the most humble and most focused on God, most faithful, most wonderful people on earth, because they do trust that God will provide for them, and God does. But if we'll do that, then we stepped in as a third party. And we did for them what God typically does for them. Now do you see how this is a loan to him? It's like, oh, thank you. I was about to do that myself. But the fact you did, how much do I owe you? It's almost like, your child needs something and you couldn't get to them fast enough to be able to give them the money, and someone else was there and they did, and like, oh, thank you so much for doing that for my child. How much do I owe you? It's as if their gift to your child was a loan to you, and now you can repay it. And for God to feel that way motivates me to want to be more generous in my fast offerings and more kind to those in need. And when you are in the service of your fellow being, you are only in the service of your God. And this proverb teaches a similar principle. Verse 18 is a proverb worth studying. Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy son spare for his crying. Parenting is another whole category in our proverbial jeopardy. There's a lot of good proverbs about this. And I love this one because, first of all, it speaks of not sparing your child for his crying. Now, again, no justification for any kind of abuse, physical, verbal, emotional, definitely not sexual. Any of those kinds of things are absolute abominations in the eyes of God. But if it's trying to balance justice and mercy, or offering tough love that has both love and toughness, if we're trying to raise our children for both the long term as well as the short term, then when it says, let not thy soul spare for his crying, I get the sense of, don't let your children whine away your will. Because sometimes that happens. And sometimes it's a battle of wills between the parent and the child, and often the child wins because the whining was just so much and the parent just said, fine, then have your way. And we give in. And unfortunately, that is teaching the child negative behaviors and rewarding them. No wonder they'll keep doing it. Instead, we need to correct that. We've seen words like reproof. Here's the word chasten. But do it while there is hope. And I do love that concept. When they're still malleable, not set in their ways, we're still teaching and training and raising in righteousness. Do it, there's hope. Elder Bednar even taught an interesting principle about family scripture study, that the power of doing that frequently is that you can see when a child starts to wander off the straight and narrow. You can see the first hints that their attitude toward spiritual things is changing. Because last week they were a little bit more excited about family scripture study than this week. I wonder what's going on. Or last week they had some deeper things to share, and now it feels like I'm force feeding. Maybe we just need to have a conversation and see how they're doing. There's still hope, and we can adjust some things. Turn next to Proverbs chapter 20. Look at verse 1. This is an interesting one about alcohol. It says, "Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise." Did you catch those words? Deceived? That's what alcohol does to you. It deceives you. It flat out tricks you and tells you lies about the good it will do for you when it seems to rob you of what it was promising. Or even that earlier one, wine is a mocker. That one's fascinating because it's just making fun of you. The alcohol you're drinking is laughing at you because it got you to do things you never would have done if you're sober. And so often those things they turn you into a laughing stock. I always loved when non-member friends would come to parties hosted by Latter-day Saints when I was a high school kid. And often afterwards they say things like, "Man, I've never been around people that are so fun while they're sober." I mean, most of the places I go, people have to, drink before they loosen up and have that much fun. And we always just laugh and go, "Yeah, we have fun and remember it the next day." It's awesome. You should keep coming. We're not mocking because the wine isn't here mocking us. Verse 4 is another good one to study. "The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg in harvest and have nothing." You see the wisdom in that saying? Here you have a farmer who doesn't want to plow, and I guess for good reason. I mean, it's cold out there. Well, yeah, but it's not cold at all compared to how cold it'll be during the winter when it's even too cold for the crops to grow. Today, it just feels a little chilly, so to the point that you think it's too cold for you to go out and plow. No, we have to work on days we don't feel like it, because the day will come where we can't do any of the work. And so if, in this verse, if you're looking for excuses not to do something, "Oh, it's too cold," or "I'm too tired," or whatever it might be, you're going to find them. Excuses aren't really hard to find if you're looking for them. But instead, we need to realize what are we doing this for? There will come a law of the harvest. And if I'm not sowing anything, then I'm not going to reap anything. And so yes, cold, come what may, I need to work regardless. As I've said to my kids, and this is a statement that I remember reading, I think in high school, and it's stuck with me ever since. There's a proverb for me, that much of the world's work has been done by people who weren't feeling very well. And so yes, despite the fact we're tired, despite the fact that we're not feeling 100%, if you're waiting on perfect days, you may never get around to plow. So again, be wise, be careful. There's a contrary to balance and prove here as well, but don't look for reasons to get out of things. Try to come up with reasons to be able to keep moving forward. Verse 5, I love this one. "Counsel in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out." Have you ever met somebody that is a person of great wisdom, but also a person of few words? Then how good are you at drawing out the understanding? Because that person has a deep well of it. Do we show real interest in people? Do we ask questions and then dig a little deeper with additional questions? Do we get the quiet to open up? Oh, because yes, there's deep water there. So send down the bucket. In verse 17, "Bread of deceit is sweet to a man, but afterwards his mouth shall be filled with gravel." We saw a similar proverb earlier, but I love this one because it's so graphic with that concept of gravel in the mouth. If you're having lunch at the beach, do you ever get sand mixed in with your sandwich? And yeah, it grinds, and the grittiness, and it's so annoying. It doesn't just dissolve. Gravel doesn't dissolve. And in this case, neither does sin unless we truly repent of it. Be careful with that bread of deceit. Oh yeah, it tasted great going down. But careful not to bite into it too hard because you might crack a tooth. There's gravel there. You'll discover it before long. Verse 27 is a proverb that Elder Packer used as the title of one of his talks. In fact, one of his most famous ones. The proverb reads, "The spirit of man is the candle of the Lord, searching all the inward parts of the belly." And President Packer's talk was called "The Candle of the Lord," based on that proverb. He was speaking about the Spirit. It's the one where he said that the Holy Ghost is like, or describing the Holy Ghost is like trying to describe the taste of salt. And if someone's never tasted salt, then no amount of words are going to help you convey what it tastes like. Same with the feeling of the Holy Ghost. If someone denies the possibility of the Spirit, then your talking about it isn't going to convince them. They have to have an experience with the Spirit so that they know what it feels like themselves. And once they do, that Spirit within them, it is the candle of the Lord. And it illuminates them and illuminates the path ahead. In verse 29, for any of you old timers, this is a good one, and I'm liking it more and more with every passing year. "The glory of young men is their strength, and the beauty of old men is the gray head." And yes, the grayer my head becomes, the more grateful I am for this verse. When my youngest daughter was little, I'd sometimes play with her and say, "Oh, Monet, your hair is like sunshine and your eyes are like blueberries." And so our sweet little blue-eyed, blonde-haired little girl loved that. But sometimes she'd look up at me and go, "And Daddy, your hair is like..." And then the wheels would turn and she'd go, "Mud." And then she'd add, "And snow." And then she'd start laughing. And with the passage of time, it went from snowy mud to muddy snow. Where it used to be, well, it's mostly dark with a little gray in there, and now she's like joking, well, it's mostly gray now with just some dark. And so we're making the transition. But it's okay, it's my beauty. And in the meantime, you can enjoy your glory, which is your strength. Was it Elder Packer, again, who shared the poem about the old crow and the young crow? It's a good one. The old crow is getting slow. The young crow is not. Of what the young crow does not know, the old crow knows a lot. At knowing things, the old crow is still the young crow's master. What does the slow old crow not know? How to go faster. Meanwhile, the young crow flies above, below, and rings around the slow old crow. What does the fast young crow not know? Where to go. And that's true too. Oh, both old and young have something to offer their opposite. And if the young can provide some of the strength, then the old can provide some of the wisdom. It's a good combination. Proverbs 21, verse 3 is worth reading. "To do justice and judgment is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." Sound a little like what Samuel said to Saul, that to obey is better than sacrifice. Or what my first mission president taught me, that before you get even into the realm of sacrifice, you've got to master the realm of obedience. And if you've learned to obey, now you're ready to move forward to the next. I get a sense from that psalm, similar counsel. Verse 9 is another one of those proverbs that my seminary boys loved. "It is better to dwell in a corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house." Is this coming from over-married Solomon? In a way, it's look for personality more than you look for prosperity in a partner. Look for their spiritual gifts and value them more than any temporal gifts they may or may not have. I'll take a small corner of the housetop if I can live together in love. Maybe you need a wide house if you're married to a brawling spouse because you want to be as far away from them as you can. Now we'll go ahead to verse 13. "Whoso stoppeth his ears at the cry of the poor, he also shall cry himself, but shall not be heard." That goes back to the enforced empathy concept we've seen several times in the Old Testament. That if you don't feel for someone, then the day will come where you feel like them. And if you didn't do anything to help others, then there won't be others to come around to help you. Verse 19, another proverb. "It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and an angry woman." There's that concept again. In a way, we're moving closer and closer to the pessimism that we will find throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. So prepare yourself for that. And then verse 27, the sacrifice of the wicked is abomination. How much more when he bringeth it with a wicked mind? We saw before about the sacrifice of the wicked is not as good as the prayer of the righteous, even though prayers seem to be easier to come by than sacrifices do. In this case, we make it even more clear that what we're worried about is the attitude behind the action. And so if you are coming with a wicked mind, you wicked person, then I'll consider your sacrifice wicked also. Mormon hints at that when he talks about things that are given to God but without real intent, then they're counted evil. Not even counted just neutral. He does say that in passing, but then he kind of thinks about it longer and then realizes, yeah, I think it's worse than nothing. I think it is actually a negative. That not giving God your heart when you're giving him something else, it kind of smacks of hypocrisy when you think about it. No wonder it's counted as evil. So don't bring your sacrifices with a wicked mind or heart. Sacrifice the wickedness first. Then bring the sacrifice that you're giving to God. Proverbs 22, let's read verse 1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. I think for some, the closer they get to death, the more they start worrying about the inheritance they're passing down to their children. And how much will it be? How much? How about a better question? What will it be? Because according to this proverb, far greater than any kind of wealth and riches that you're passing down to posterity, a good name is rather to be chosen than that. Your honor, your virtue, your integrity can be an inheritance for children, and it can last so much longer than any, whatever's in your 401k. It's interesting to see, well, I'll put it this way. I love meeting people who know my parents. And my parents are just celestial souls, and when people know them, and they're just, are you that? Are you related to those Halversons? And when I tell them, yes, I am, I am grateful for the good name that they've given me. I hope to pass it down to my children. I don't know if there'll be much else to pass down. It's okay. I'll attach it in my will. I'll just quote that verse. How's that? Okay. Sorry, kids, I got nothing to leave you, but here's a good name, and I hope it sticks. In verse 2, the rich and poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. I think that verse should be mentioned every time we talk about the law of consecration, because that's what happens. That verse describes what happens through consecration. The rich and the poor meet together. Somewhere in the middle, as the rich are providing for the poor because they had more than they needed, and the poor are receiving to be able to meet their needs. And they realize in the process that the Lord is the maker of them all. I think we live in a time, sadly, where the rich feel justified in not sharing anything with the poor, or very little, because they think, well, I did this all myself. I'm a self-made man. I earned all this. I worked for it. Well, yes, you did, probably. Maybe not to the degree that you're taking credit, though. Because if we can understand that the Lord is the maker, where were you born, and in what circumstances, and with what possibilities for education, and are there some structural or systemic things that worked in your favor that have not worked in the favor of others? And be careful about pride from above, because it's just going to be met with pride from below, and that's a disaster. Whereas in real consecration, when we realize that we are stewards rather than owners, and that we're here to serve the Lord, that the Lord is the maker of us all, and so we come together under his direction and offer it all to him as he then gives us according to our needs. That's a beautiful verse for that. Verse 6 contains a very famous passage. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I know some of you are scratching your heads looking at that verse thinking, well, that hasn't been the case for me. I did everything I could to train up my children in the ways they should go. And family prayer and family scripture study and family home evening, and I did everything I could to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And yet they are so far away from the straight and narrow path, it's as if they never heard a word about it. A good friend of mine and I were just texting yesterday, and he said, you never know what life's going to bring and what your children will go through and what they'll put you through. And he said, every once in a while at church, I'll see a sweet young mother or father out in the hallway with their baby. And I'm tempted sometimes to walk by and just say, enjoy it now, because it's going to be harder later. So I always resist that temptation. And I said, good. I feel it sometimes too, and resist it as well. You never know what your children will put you through. But hold on to that promise. Trust in the good seeds that you've planted. And trust that they're children of heavenly parents too, who have that child's best interest in mind and have the time and patience to play the long game. We have the theology to play the long game too. We can trust in God's ultimate promises that when He is old, and we don't know how old that's going to be, but they'll return to the path that they wandered away from. In the meantime, don't let up on your training. Okay. Verse 7, here's another one. The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. You ever had a lesson on debt before? That verse will usually come up. You listen to Dave Ramsey, who's a good Southern boy that knows his scriptures, and talks about financial security. There's a warning that he would give. The borrower is servant to the lender. Debt is absolute bondage. And it's a taskmaster that doesn't take any days off. So be very careful about that. In verse 28, be careful about this too. Remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set. That's great advice. The ancient landmarks. In political jargon, we talk about conservatism and progressivism or liberalism. And progressivism is all about progress. I want to move forward. It's the future that I'm looking to. Whereas conservatism is I'm conserving the past. And so conservatives, for the most part, look to the past and see its value and hold on to it, whereas progressives look to the future and think things are going to get better. So let's get rid of the things that are holding us back. Now, like I've said before, I'm a prover of contraries. I try to seek balance. And so I see value in both. And so can I look to the future with my eyes to the past as well? Can I balance these? And I love the thought, especially among the rising generation, which tends to be more future-oriented because they have more of it to look to. Be careful about removing the ancient landmarks. They might be there for a reason. Before you knock out that wall, double check to see if it's load-bearing, will you? Because we might be doing things wisely rather than simply unintentionally. And change for the sake of change may lead to more harm than good. Do a little more homework on the ancient landmarks, will you? And then you'll decide whether or not they should be removed. Proverbs 23 comes next, and if you look at verse 1, when thou sittest to eat with a ruler, consider diligently what is before thee. And put a knife to thy throat, if thou be a man given to appetite. Be not desirous of his dainties, for they are deceitful meat. Now that's some strong language. Put a knife to thy throat. What he's warning you about is be very careful, especially if you're seated before a ruler. Because they're movers and shakers, and they're in charge, and wait, they're entertaining you? Wonder why. Are there strings attached? That's why he says to consider diligently what's before you. And if you're the type that's given to appetite, and you're just going to eat it all and take it all hook, line, and sinker to the point now that the ruler feels justified in making demands since you accepted all that they gave, I'll be very careful. Because those dainties, as they're called, might be deceitful when all is said and done. In the book of Revelation, when it talks about Babylon and the way that it draws people in, it's through its dainties and its delicacies and its delicious things. But all of those things are deceitful, as they're just trying to lull us into a false sense that, oh yeah, I've got something to offer you. Come feast at my table. No thanks. I know my appetite better than that, and I might end up eating things that I shouldn't. So no thank you. In verse 7, This is a famous phrase. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Have you heard that before? That your thoughts lead to attitudes and behaviors and ultimately to who you'll end up being. So be careful what you think about. For as you think in your heart, so will you be. Verse 29 through 35 is a long section, but I've never seen a better description of alcohol in the scriptures than this. We saw one before about wine mocking you, right, and deceiving you, but this one's even better. So for my wife and son who work with alcoholics and addiction recovery, this is a passage that I hope will help motivate people to stay away from the dangers of alcohol or overcome the addiction, no matter how many times it takes to get over it. Starting at verse 29, who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? Well, let me answer. They that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine. It's a great description of the kinds of results that alcohol brings into people's lives. Remember the list. Woe, sorrow, contention, babbling. That's why it's mocking you. Wounds without cause. How did this happen to me? I don't even remember. Well, keep going. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. You see the way it's kind of seducing you into putting that cup to the lips? Oh, it just looks so good as it's swirling around in that glass. But keep reading. At the last it biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder. And if you saw the serpent's tail in the swirling of the cup, I think it'd be easier to put it down and keep it away from you. Keep going. Thine eyes shall behold strange women. And Proverbs has warned us against them multiple times. And thine heart shall utter perverse things that you won't even know are coming out of your mouth. And that's not all. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. Now, what a powerful mental image. Imagine someone trying to sleep on the deck of a boat that's being tossed back and forth by a stormy sea. Or even worse, look up and there in the crow's nest, at the top of the mast, oh, that person's getting thrown around side to side by this storm. Well, that describes those that are drunk pretty well. Are they leaning over the edge and losing their lunch over everything that they've been drinking? The passage ends, they have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When shall I awake? Can you imagine being in that situation? Why do I feel so sick to my stomach? Do I have the flu? Is COVID coming back? No, you're drunk, or you're hungover, and no wonder you feel sick. Or they've beaten me, I didn't even feel it. Well, yeah, you were in no position to feel anything. But like, where did I get this black eye, or that bruise, or why is my car dented, or it's scary what can happen when people have lost control of themselves. So when he asks, when shall I awake? When am I going to wake up and snap out of this? But then how does the passage end? I will seek it yet again. And that's the real tragedy. Despite everything that we read in these verses of woe and sorrow and babbling and wounds, and I was seasick to the point I thought I'll never do this again. But as soon as I really wake up and get sober again, so when are we going to go out and drink? My heart goes out to those who are caught in that snare. And there is hope for you. Again, I hear it from my wife and son all the time, and it's amazing what they're trying to do to help, and amazing what people are trying to do to be helped. If you're in that situation, keep fighting that fight. And if you're not, then don't ever get into it. Powerful passage that I hope warns us away. Proverbs 24 comes next. And if you look at verse 10, if thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. Now, please don't be offended by that, but realize that, well, for that particular adversity, my strength was indeed insufficient. It doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Keep growing stronger, keep developing that spiritual strength, and the day will come where adversity doesn't beat you. you beat it. And there's no fainting anymore. Or verse 13 and 14. My son, eat thou honey, because it is good, and the honeycomb, which is sweet to thy taste. So shall the knowledge of wisdom be unto thy soul. When thou hast found it, then there shall be a reward, and thy expectation shall not be cut off. We saw honey as a negative thing in an earlier verse, that sweet seduction of sin. Here it's being used in a more positive light, that wisdom ought to taste like honey to you. I've read that among some Jewish families, they'll even do that if they're going to read scripture with their children, they'll open some honey and put a little dot on the child's tongue before they begin to study scripture, so that that child associates scripture with sweetness every time they open the book. I hope that we sense that. I hope that, again, I'm speaking to the choir because here you are with me, but this is a sweet experience, to be able to open up the scriptures and to be able to feel the honey begin to flow into our souls. Turn to verse 17 next. Rejoice not when thine enemy falleth, and let not thine heart be glad when he stumbleth, lest the Lord see it, and it displease him, and then brace yourself, and he turn away his wrath from him. Ah, darn it, I love that proverb right up until the end, because it seems so noble. I'm not going to rejoice at an enemy's fall. I'm not going to rub it in that they stumbled. I don't want the Lord to see that, because it will displease him. Now, so far so good. Yeah, the Lord doesn't want me to think that way toward my enemy. But at the end, because then the Lord's going to turn away his wrath from him, from that enemy. Oh, wait. Is this a little spiteful still? Well, again, we're still living on an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of culture. And we're past that, right? The Lord in the Sermon on the Mount raises the bar and says, yeah, can we go beyond that and get to the next level and actually love your enemies instead of just putting up with them? But back in this time period, he is suggesting something here that I find interesting. If someone is wicked, if your enemy is out there, then yes, they will reap what they sowed, but vengeance is the Lord's, and we're going to leave it in his hands. Remember how David treated Saul, okay? If, on the other hand, then you step in, it's kind of the flip side. Now, I hadn't thought of this. It's the flip side of what we saw about lending to the Lord. If I'm caring for the poor, I'm doing what God would do. Well, if I'm punishing the wicked, or if I am attacking my enemy, then again, I'm stepping in as middleman and doing what the Lord is supposed to do. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. And I'm supposed to leave that in his hands. And if I don't, then what has happened? Well, according to this verse, picture God stepping back. Again, with the poor, he's like, oh, thank you so much for doing that. May I pay you back for what you've done. Well, in this case, the Lord looks at you and like, why did you do that? I'm supposed to reward wickedness with punishment. You thought you knew how to do that better? Well, first of all, you don't. You don't see their side of the story as well as I do. You don't know the big picture. That's why you've got to leave it with me. But since you think you've done all that's necessary, I guess I'll step back. I mean, if you think about it, God is far more merciful than we could ever be, but he's also far more just. And there's wisdom in letting God deal with it, because he knows he won't be too hard or too soft. God lives in the Goldilocks zone, okay? It's the God zone. And for us to just leave things in God's hands is the wisest way to live. He can take care of things better than we can. Keep going, though, in verse 28 and 29, here's a different proverb to live by. Be not a witness against thy neighbor without cause, and deceive not with thy lips. Say not, I will do so to him as he hath done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. Yeah, don't say that, because that's the negative counterpart of the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have others do unto you. I don't know what even to call this if it's not gold. What is this? Aluminum foil, tin, iron, lead. The lead rule is do to others what they did to you. Yeah, they were mean to you, be mean right back. And I'm going to do what he's done to me. No, we've got to be better than that. Again, we're trying to graduate from eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth levels of living. Proverbs 25, look at verse 1. These are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. So here we have wisdom being passed down through posterity. By the time Hezekiah is on the throne, quite a bit of time has passed since good old King Solomon. But his wisdom far outlived him. And so here's his scribes copying out those Proverbs from Solomon, saying they still apply. And here we are thousands of years later, and they still apply in our day as well. So hold on to them. Verse 11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver. There's the beauty and value of a well-spoken word. Or 21 and 22, if thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. Now, if you stopped right there, we've got New Testament mentality. But keep reading, and sadly it's still Old Testament eye for an eye. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. Now, that, yikes about the last part again. Just like we saw in the previous proverb, it's like, how are we treating our enemies? Oh, you treated them meanly, then God will come at them with kindness. And this one flips it around. You treat them with kindness, then it's God that will heap coals of fire upon their head. Now, only if they deserve the coals of fire, okay? We're trying to balance justice and mercy here, but it's a matter of who's giving which. And if you're the ones giving the justice, then God's not going to. He doesn't have to. You thought you did a good job yourself. The flip side, though, if you'll respond with mercy, God will take care of the justice, whatever that entails. Now, I've said before, this is still Old Testament time period, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth approach. By the New Testament, Jesus will change it and tell us all to love our enemies and to pray for those that despitefully use us and persecute us. But even that took some time for the saints to grow into, because there is a place in the book of Romans where Paul quotes this verse from the Proverbs and still talks about heaping coals of fire upon their heads. When you read that in Romans, it's kind of jarring. It's like, what? That seems a little rough day, Paul? You okay? And if we don't realize, or I should say what we should realize, Paul is quoting Scripture there. And the saints are still in the process of fulfilling the law and getting on to something more gospel, something loftier and higher. You can look at verse 25, and if you've ever been a missionary out in the field, you'll know what this one means to you. As cold waters to a thirsty land, so is good news from a far country. That's for sure. Every letter, every care package I got from California when I was serving in Puerto Rico was a breath of fresh air. It was a drink of cold water. Makes you wonder who's in need of your cold water right now. Go write them. Send them an email, send them a text, let them know there's news from you. Or verse 28, how about this piece of wisdom? He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. We're back to the idea of self-discipline. And if we can't discipline ourselves, then how do we expect to be able to survive the attacks of others? We will fall prey to whatever temptations and snares they have set, because there's nothing stopping them from coming in and conquering. There's no wall there. Proverbs 26 has a few verses that are worth holding on to. Verse 4 and 5 are tricky ones. Verse 4 says, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. But then verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. And you're going, what? In two verses, side by side, they contradict each other? What's up with that? Again, verse 4 says, don't descend to their level. It's not going to do any good. You're going to look as foolish as they are. So if they mock you, if they ridicule you, just leave it alone. Turn the other cheek, get past, live on a higher standard, and people will recognize the difference and they'll honor you for it. They know, like you do, that such mockery or ridicule is beneath you. And it wasn't beneath your attacker, so that puts them on a lower level. Then what's up with verse 5? No, go ahead and answer a fool according to his folly. In this case, it's fight fire with fire. And they're shredding you, then shred them right back. It's actually interesting that my dissertation was on Thomas Paine's anti-biblical attacks. And it was part of a larger project that I had in mind of just how has religion been attacked throughout modern history. And what I found in my research was so often it boils down to ridicule. It's just the great and spacious building. They're mocking and pointing the finger, right? And it shames people into leaving the tree of life. And so throughout so much of the history of modern skepticism, and even ancient, they would just turn faith into a farce. And they would make religion a laughingstock. And then people would be shamed out of their belief and just feel, I look smarter if I leave all of this. Well, what's interesting is reading and studying the responses to those kinds of attacks. They fall along the lines of Proverbs 26:4 and 5. And most ministers would quote verse 4 and say, no, I'm not going to descend to that level. And some are, I'm not even going to respond because that's beneath me. And others, I will defend the faith, but I'm not going to attack the faithless. I don't want to do that. And so they tended towards verse 4. But there were others who tended towards verse 5. And they'd usually quote Proverbs 26, verse 5. And they'd usually bring up Elijah and the priests of Baal. And he was a smack talker himself. Remember? We got fire. Yes, we do. We got fire. How about you? And so here it is. I think the priests of Baal are foolish, and I'm going to respond with some tomfoolery of my own. And so Elijah does. And so did some of these ministers. And they wrote diatribes against Thomas Paine, for example, that were as sarcastic and snarky as Paine's own writings were against them. And yet, who can play that game? Tom. And so they do it. Which one's right? That's the tricky part. And I think there is wisdom in putting these verses side by side and forcing the issue. Because you really do have to pick, am I doing verse 4 here or am I doing verse 5? Because they both seem like wise counsel. But you can't do them both simultaneously. That's the key. These, therefore, must be situation specific. And I had a student, in fact, that came to me and says, I want to make some like satirical videos that poke fun at the loss of faith. And I like, okay. And I talked to him about these two verses and said, just be aware of the balance beam, the tightrope that you're walking here. Myself, personally, I'm a verse 4 kind of a person, not a verse 5. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I was a verse 5 kind of a guy. And I think it started to switch on my mission. Because on my mission, I'm like, you want to bash with me? Oh, I'll bash with you. And I learned then that you lose even when you win. And I didn't like the loss of the spirit that came with contention. And so ever since, I've tried my hardest, and I'm getting better and better at it with time, to avoid verse 5 at all costs and never answer a fool according to his folly. Or even insinuate that they're fools at all. I try to give them the benefit of the doubt every time. In hopes that the Spirit can be a part of our relationship and our conversations, and I can hopefully lead them in a better way. But I do realize that there are others in a situation in life or at an age or with a personality, whatever it might be. I warned this student of mine who's got a great personality, and he even showed me some of his videos, and I said, those are funny. And I'm grateful for the goal that you have in making them. I would just make sure you steer clear of individual people and don't name names or again, label someone a fool. I think there are sensitive ways that verse 5 can be navigated. But like I said, I'll stick with verse 4. Keep going. Verse 11. Here's a graphic one, so brace yourself. As a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. I told you it'd be a graphic mental image. If you really stop and pause and think that one through, it's disgusting. But hopefully that disgusts us out of following suit. In fact, that's why Peter does it. In 2 Peter chapter 2, he quotes that verse and applies it to sinners and says, if you sin, but then repent, you got it out of you. You vomited out that vice. But if you go back to it, guess what you've just become? a dog returning to its vomit. And again, if you can let that disgusting mental image move you away from falling back into your sins, then it was totally worth it. Okay? Or verse 14, for those that are the sleepers on their beds, like we saw in a previous proverb. As the door turneth upon his hinges, so doth the slothful upon his bed. Can you picture that one? As they're just rolling back and forth, never getting up and actually getting anything done. Verse 20, another simple piece of advice. Where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. Go back to our discussion of gossip. And what does it do when it comes to you? Does it end? Do you put out the fire, or do you fan the flames and pass them on? Because if you'll just, and this is true not just of gossip, but of anger or friction or any other kind of negative emotion, if you'll just rob it of its fuel, there's no more wood. The fire's going to go out. Let it do that. Quit adding fuel to the fire. Or in Proverbs 27, I love verse 2. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth. A stranger, and not thine own lips. How do we say that in our day? Don't toot your own horn. This is old advice. Or verse 6. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. When the Apostle Paul talks about speaking the truth in love, that's the kind of truth that might hurt, but it's spoken in love because I care for you and care how you turn out. That's the description there. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. I don't want this to hurt, but, well, sometimes doctors have to cause some pain to be able to cure us from worse pains out there. Same when it comes to parenting or leading or correcting. Back to the list of women for 500, Alex. Verse 15, my seminary boys loved this one. A continual dropping in a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. Yeah, same thing. You show me a contentious friend, partner, it doesn't have to be gendered here, but show me a contender. And what will I show you? Water torture, where the rain just keeps on dripping and dropping, and it's incessant. Or verse 22, though thou shouldst bray a fool in a mortar among wheat with a pestle, yet will not his foolishness depart from him. Now for this one, we have to know how people would grind their grains back in the day. And perhaps you've even seen this done in our day. You can find a mortar and pestle, and you put corn in there or kernels of grain. You can do this with a lot of different things, and you just crush it's between stone and stone, and you're grinding it down to powder. Well, it'll work to separate wheat from chaff. That'll separate to ground corn into cornmeal. But it won't work if you've got a fool in there. And even though you're grinding him out, trying to get the foolishness out of him, it's not going to work. That's how much it sticks to them. It's what they're made of. You can sense Solomon's frustration there of, try as I might. I've been doing this for 27 chapters now. Are there still fools out there? Because what's going to work? Or verse 23 and 4, be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds, for riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation. We're back to a temporal one that has some spiritual aspects. Know the state of your flocks. Keep an eye on those herds. We could say in our day, keep a budget. Keep an eye on your finances. See how your home and car are as far as repair or disrepair. Plan for a rainy day. Balance your checkbook. Keep an eye on how things are going. Those are all good pieces of advice for all of us. Now, chapter 28 and 29, we're nearing the end of the book of Proverbs, and now we're going to go back to two chapters that are heavy on the old formulation. This is good, but that is bad. Go back to comparing and contrasting and choose the right one. In chapter 28, there's 28 verses, and 18 of them follow that formula. Here's one for you. Verse 1, the wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. The first half is interesting. No one's chasing you. Why are you running? Well, because I probably ought to be chased based on the things that I've done. If you're dishonest and therefore you're always keeping an eye at your back, who's chasing me down to get me to repay them or to punish me for what I've done? Whereas the righteous, I'm not being pursued by anything. I'm fine. I can be bold as a lion. Or verse 13, he that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. Confess and forsake, we see in the Doctrine and Covenants. That's the definition of what repentance is all about. But here the emphasis is on confession as opposed to covering our sins. And remember, in Hebrew, the verb for atonement is cover. So there's this irony. If you cover your sins, as in hide them, don't confess them to God, or in serious cases to priesthood leaders, then you're trying to cover them, which means God can't. Whereas if you uncover them, and that's what confession is, then God will cover them through the atonement. I love that, because it's going to be covered by one or the other, but not both. So take your pick. I hope that motivates us to confess as well as forsake our sins. In verse 15, as a roaring lion and a raging bear, so is a wicked ruler over the poor people. We saw a raging bear earlier, right? Mama bear. I'd rather meet her than a fool in his folly. Here, though, it's wicked leadership. We saw that countries that are no longer good will no longer be great. Well, here's the reason why. If there's a wicked ruler, man, they're roaring lions, and who can stand up to them? They're raging bears, and there's no control. I don't know what to do with them. And we have seen in recent days world leaders roaring and raging in uncontrollable ways. And we're kind of at a loss to know what to do in those situations. No wonder we need to try harder to elect and support righteous women and men in positions of power. In verse 20, a faithful man shall abound with blessings, but he that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent. He repeats a similar language in verse 22. He that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye, and considereth not that poverty shall come upon him. In our day we call them get-rich-quick schemes, and they are schemes. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So be a little more wise, and be careful about hastening to become rich. Proverbs 29 then has 14 out of 27 are the this is good, that is bad formulation. Verse 2 is one of them. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. We're back to the roaring lions and the raging bears. Or verse 15, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. This is another version of what we saw before about if you spare the rod, you hate the child. The children need your direction and even your correction when necessary. As Elder Holland once said, second only to your love, they need your limits. And that's valuable advice. Here, it's not just sparing the rod. It seems to be sparing everything. A child left to himself, no, we've got to be better than that. We have to be more intentional in our parenting. Or verse 18, this is a famous phrase. Where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. No vision. This is a beautiful verse about the need for perspective, or the need for goals, something to shoot for or look forward to. This is a great verse about the need for prophets and prophetic vision, seers, seers, and revelators. And without that, we perish for lack of light. We don't know where we should be heading as a society. And so, yes, be grateful for those who have eyes to see. Or verse 21, he that delicately bringeth up his servant from a child shall have him become his son at the length. Notice the process there. You start as servant, but you're raising that servant up from a child. And as they grow up under your guidance, by the end, they feel like a child to you. They become a son or daughter at the last. A great example of that is the Doctrine and Covenants taken as a whole. Because early on, Joseph Smith is described as my servant Joseph. But keep reading, and he becomes Oh, Joseph, my friend, and best of all, Joseph, my son. How to grow up in God, that's the process. First we are hired, then we're adopted. Because we don't act like a servant anymore. We act like a child of God. We've grown up in Him. Proverbs 30 then, look at verse 8. Remove far from me vanity and lies. The word vanity is preparing us for Ecclesiastes in a moment. Give me neither poverty nor riches, he asks. Feed me with food convenient for me. It's a great verse about contentment. Being content with sufficiency. I have enough for my needs. I'm in the Goldilocks zone. I don't have too much nor too little, so I'm good. That's what he's asking for. I'm not asking for riches, but if I could avoid poverty, that would be nice. And so somewhere in that middle ground, since there is danger at both sides of the spectrum, at least that's what he says in verse 9, lest I be full and deny thee, that's too much, and say, who's the Lord? I don't need him. Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. That's not having enough. So avoid both of those and find contentment in the middle. Verse 11 starts with a phrase that's repeated in 12 and 13 and 14. And the phrase is, there is a generation that, and then fill in the blank, with something wicked, something negative, that this generation seems to struggle with. And what's interesting about that phrasing is that there do seem to be sins that are associated with certain time periods more than others. And at this stage of the earth's history, this seems to be the struggle that's common. Philosophies come and go, and with them the justification for certain sins. And what's interesting here is, what are the sins of this generation? It's an important phrase to hold on to. And if we are ever to become clear of the sins of this generation, we need to know what our generational sins might be. And so pay attention to culture and society and what kinds of aberrations are being normalized. What kinds of wrongs are being said, oh no, they're right, it's okay. We've just removed the ancient landmark, okay, that our fathers and mothers set up for good reason. Be aware of cultural norms. And it's hard because culture then, because it's our own culture, we think it's all normal because this is just how we do things. One of the great blessings of studying Scripture, because it gives us enough historical understanding to realize, actually, I think we're the oddballs. And there are some things going on in this generation right now that have never been justified in the past. And so we need to be careful about justifying them in the present. Next, go to verse 24, where he draws upon some lessons from nature. We saw it before with the ants, Aesop's ant and grasshopper. Well, how about this one? There be 4 things which are little upon the earth, but they are exceeding wise. So little creatures, but big lessons. Number 1, the ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their meat in the summer. And we already studied that one before. Number 2, the conies, and that's usually translated rock badgers, are but a feeble folk. They're small, they're weak, yet make they their houses in the rocks. Well, that's wise of them. If you're weak, your home better not be, and so there they are dwelling among the rocks. Third, the locusts, they have no king, yet go they forth all of them by bands. You want to talk about incredible organization, even though there doesn't seem to be a lead locust anywhere. And number 4, the spider, which taketh hold with her hands and is in kings' palaces. I mean, she can take her home anywhere she wants. Just lift it up in her own hands. It's in her own hands to do it. And so you want to be in a king's palace? That's fine. She'll get there. It is interesting to take lessons from all life and realize that there is wisdom in the animal kingdom that sometimes seems to be missing from human beings. And if we can keep an eye out, all things are created and made to bear witness of God and to teach lessons of living. Let's be wise enough to recognize them. And now we're ready for Proverbs 31. This is an absolute masterpiece. And it's in some ways the Old Testament's equivalent of Doctrine and Covenants, section 25. That beautiful revelation to Emma Smith that puts into such powerful perspective the role of women in the kingdom of God. This one does a similar beautiful job of that, starting about verse 10 and going through the end of the chapter. But we start in verse 1 ourselves and see that these are words from King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. Now, unfortunately, we don't know who King Lemuel is. Some scholars suggest, is this just another name for Solomon? Are these still Solomon's Proverbs? And I don't know why, but they're calling him King Lemuel here? I don't know. If that's the case, is he learning these things from Bathsheba? That would be fascinating. But it doesn't necessarily matter who is behind it all, because these words are true, notwithstanding their source. The logos is sufficient to overcome any lack of ethos. Well, in this case, start in verse 10, like I said, and we'll find an answer to this question. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Now, it's a rhetorical question. It's one we're supposed to answer for ourselves. Who can find that? Well, I better be one of them. Because if I'm going to marry someone, then I want them to measure up to this description. I sometimes joked with my seminary and institute students that when you're dating, or especially in courtship, before you drop down to one knee, hold up your spouse or your prospective spouse against, for chapters like Proverbs 31 or Doctrine and Covenants 25. Or if you're a sister and he's on his knee, like, well, wait, before you ask me anything, let me compare you to things like, Mormon's description of Captain Moroni. Because if you're not like him, then I'm worried about the powers of hell. And so are we measuring up to these kinds of scriptural descriptions of celestial people? And this is the description of a celestial sister, a virtuous woman. And that's the first description, far above rubies. We saw rubies earlier. Wisdom is worth more than rubies. Virtue is worth more than rubies. So what you know and how you live and how you act, all of that, that's treasure that needs to be uncovered. I love the fact that my brother and his wife, when they had children, every daughter got the same middle name. And it was Ruby. Because they wanted their daughters to know who they were. As daughters of God, your value is far above rubies, and no matter what the world says about you, the world often doesn't have much positive to say about virtuous women. They seem to prioritize other attributes. But God, He wants to see virtue in all of His children, and that middle name was a reminder for all of them. And what makes them so valuable? Start in verse 11. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. He isn't looking elsewhere, largely because she isn't. And they rest content in one another's love, and they feel secure within their relationship. I safely trust in you, and you can safely trust in me. I have no need of other spoils out there. In verse 12, she will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. From beginning to end, there's nothing to worry about here. In verse 13, she seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. Here we see her as a hard worker, as creative. Keep going. She is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar. We see a businesswoman here, an entrepreneur. She's taking necessary risks, like those merchants in their ships. Keep reading. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. This is a tireless servant of other people, including her own servants. Not feeling above them, but trying to meet every need, no matter what time of day or night it might be. She considereth a field and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planted a vineyard. Again, those are things that we would typically associate, at least Old Testament would associate with men's prerogative or men's position. But no, this woman is considering fields and buying them, looking for wise investments in the future and making sure that she can take advantage of those things. She's doing things and not just waiting for a husband to take care of them all. She is proactive. In verse 17, she girdeth her loins with strength and strengtheneth her arms. It's a tragedy if anyone were to associate femininity with fragility or womanhood with weakness. That's not the women I know. They are strong. And when I see, for example, what Paul says to Timothy, that, I recognize your faith, Timothy, because it's the same faith I saw in your mother and your grandmother. Oh yeah, Lois and Eunice were amazing, and I see them in you. I feel strongly about that verse because I follow it with amazing grandmothers and an incredible mother that were women of strength and spirituality. I'm grateful. I married someone cut from the same cloth, and raising daughters that are women of strength as well. In verse 18, she perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. Now the second half seems to be a repetition of what we saw before. She riseth while it's yet night to help people. And so often, who's the one nursing the baby crying at night? It's the mother. I did make a deal with my wife that if it's nursing, then you take care of it. But if it's a diaper, I'll take care of those. Okay, we'll be on opposite ends of digestion to be able to work on, try to become equal partners here. And so my candle was often lit at night as well, but still nothing compared to my wife's. With our oldest, the first time well, I woke up one morning and I turned to my wife and was so shocked and elated, and I said, she slept through the night. And my wife, bleary-eyed, rolled those eyes and said to me, you slept through the night. I'm like, oh, she didn't? No. And I'm guessing you didn't? No. Sorry. Well, wake me up if it's a dirty diaper. But there's more to that. Not just the candle not going out, but more importantly, in my opinion, is the first phrase. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. The challenge, again, we live in a world that is too colored by its historic male chauvinism and patriarchy, to the point that society has even overcorrected instead of corrected. And sadly, so often of the current wave of feminism is trying to turn women more into men, when I think the solution would have actually tried to develop the feminine qualities within men. If men were the problem, don't become the problem. Balance the contraries and help us, please. And we're getting better at that. But sadly, we still live in a day where the world is probably not going to pat women on the back for being the kind of virtuous daughters of God that he intends for them to become. No, he wants them to do all the male kinds of things. Again, there's something better here. And it's, as described in the Proclamation of the World and the Family, being equal partners. There is equality without equivalence. There is full partnership between helps meet for one another, all that we studied with Adam and Eve, for example. There's beautiful examples. We saw it with Deborah and Jael. Deborah out in the battle and Jael in the home, but they're both fighting the same war. And so whether one is out in the workplace or the other is in the home, if your priorities are set and straight and focused on God, doing what he would have you do, then where it's occurring is less important than how you're doing it. But I'll say this. Make sure that you know, turn to the Lord for your kudos and ask him how you're doing and how he feels about it. Especially to you wonderful women who have spent your lives, I'll say it about my own mother, who could have been anything and instead chose to be everything for her children. I'm grateful for a wife who has sacrificed so much of her professional potential to fully live the measure of her maternal creation. And find ways as life has changed and children's needs and schedules and so on have been adjusted, that she can take time during the day and be something for herself at times where children don't need her to be mom. There's ways to balance it. But the key, in my opinion, is that phrase, perceive that your merchandise is good. And that it's Elder Cook, Elder Quinton Cook, his talk about women in the church. And what did he say? Do the best you can and assume that everyone else is too. That way you don't have to feel judged by others and you don't have to judge anybody else. That was great advice from Elder Cook. And to see something here, perceive, if you're doing the best you can, then perceive that your merchandise is good. And when people say, oh, you're just a stay-at-home mom? What do you mean just? Well, you're just an employee. You only had to master one profession. I have to master them all at home. And they're all called upon. And that's a good thing. My wife years ago wrote a personal essay, and the part I remember best was she said, I think it was her title even, Goliath shouldn't need a pep talk. And what I loved about her comments in this paper was, yeah, Goliath, you don't need a locker room speech like, hey, you're bigger than they are, you're stronger than they are, you can do this. He knew, duh. He looked down from his 9'6" stature and, yeah, I think I got this. And her point in making that comment was she considered it odd whenever prophets and apostles would come to women's conference, for example, or the women's session of general conference and say things like, you're awesome, you're amazing. Because my wife was like, well, duh. Goliath shouldn't need a pep talk. And God's daughters shouldn't have to be reassured that they're doing amazing things. Well, if you know who you are, and you know whose you are, if you perceive that your merchandise is good, and I am making a difference in the place that matters most, right here in my own home among my own children, and husbands better feel that way just as strongly as wives do, then I don't need a pep talk. I know what I'm doing. The challenge is if you're living in a world that keeps telling Goliath that height is a problem, and how embarrassed you should be for being so tall and strong, then I guess you would need a pep talk. Because you have this sense of inferiority, when you should have a sense of, I don't know, I wouldn't say superiority, because that's just pride from above, but knowing your merchandise is good. For all of you sisters that don't need a pep talk, can I at least thank you for the kind of lives that you're living? And those sisters who do need a pep talk, it's only because you live in a world that has robbed you of your sense of identity and living in a world that does not perceive that your merchandise is good. May I please reassure you that God knows just how good your merchandise is. No wonder he says that it is far above rubies. A few more verses here. Look at 19 to 22. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. And those were clothes and colors that were usually reserved for royalty. But this woman is giving those to her own children. She's giving them to her household. She's giving them to the needy, poor, and strangers. These are tapestries that she's weaving. Oh, and best of all are those threads of kindness and charity that are woven throughout. I don't know of a better verse or set of verses to describe the work of the Relief Society than that. That they are working hands to the spindle and distaff, but also hands stretched to the poor, because this is who I'm sewing these things for. I think of Tabitha in the book of Acts, this young girl that Peter raises from the dead. And what was she known for and missed so much for? Because she was always looking for ways to make things for those around her, recognizing other people's needs and trying to meet them. And not afraid of the snow. I know how I've clothed you. You will be covered and protected. You don't have to fear the elements because you're under the cover of my wings. There's something powerful about the life-saving work of the Relief Society. And you sister saints are giving so much relief to a world that desperately needs it. Clothing the naked and feeding the poor and building faith in the faithless. There is no fullness of the gospel without the work of God's daughters. And together with his sons, we've got work to do. And a weary world that needs us to do it. In verse 23, we see that her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. And remember, gates is usually where judgment was passed. So you want really wise people at the gates. And her husband is known there. And of course he's considered wise. He chose her after all. I mean, look at who he married. Oh yeah, that's a man of great wisdom. He should help us make our decisions. Verse 24 and 5, she maketh fine linen and selleth it and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Another nod to her work, but again it seems like she's going above and beyond. More than just clothe my family, more than cover the needy, I'm making enough fine linen that I can even sell it and deliver things to the merchant. So it goes and blesses an ever-expanding circle of people. There's, again, that entrepreneurial spirit, a woman of business in the Lord's way. In verse 26, she openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. Oh, wisdom and kindness? She's got mind and heart. It's a great set of contraries for her to develop. Or 27, she looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Not idle on the one extreme, although maybe in our day it's the opposite extreme we need to be more aware of. Not idle, but not burned out either. Yes, the candle is still lit at night, but it's not burning her out. And so we need to carefully balance that as well with, yes, be this kind of sister, but also don't run faster than you have strength. Those are things we need to be wise about as well. Verse 28 is one of my favorites because I feel it so strongly about my mother and about my wife. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. I'm grateful for a mother that I can rise up and bless, because her life has been spent rising up so often to bless us. I'm grateful for you, Mom, and I love you. And I can say the same to my wife, who is the maypole of our family, as she sometimes regrets. Can't have a second to herself, because everybody always wants to be with her. She's that kind of person, and I don't know of a more kind-hearted and selfless and just champion of her children that will mama bear fight for their every need and do her absolute best to meet them. This verse of praising, I can do that in a heartfelt way to the women in my life and to all of you incredible sisters out there. I pray that you feel the reality of this verse. I hope that your children are rising up and praising you. And if they're not, wait. Just keep waiting. Motherhood can be a thankless job for a long time. And if you're looking for immediate feedback, or if words of affirmation are your love language, and you're a young mother, hold out. Hold out with hope. The day will come. And let a coo of gratitude or a smile of satisfaction, let that be sufficient praise for now. And those of us that are on the giving end of that praise, or should be on the giving end of it, then make sure you give it. Okay? You children, please rise up and bless your mother. And you husbands, please offer your wife more words of praise, or offers of help, or anything else that they need. Okay? A few last verses in this great book then. Verse 29, many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Oh, and I hope every husband feels that way about his wife, and every child feels that way about their mother. That, yeah, there's a lot of amazing people out there, but I got the best one of all. And meanwhile, all the neighbors are saying the same thing, and that's good, that's okay. I am grateful that when my wife and I were dating, my mom sent my wife a note, unbeknownst to me, and just thanked her. We weren't even engaged yet, but I was hoping for it. My mom knew it. Maybe she was trying to sweeten the deal somehow. But no pressure from Mom. She just said to Emily, you know, I don't know what the future will hold. And in a coming day, if you'll be my daughter-in-law or just one of my son's ex-girlfriends. But regardless of what happens, may I thank you for proving to my son that the ideals of womanhood really do exist. And boy, was that insightful. I was grateful to have met someone that in my mind and heart excelled them all and proved to me that daughters of God that exceeded all expectation really did exist. Finish the book then in verse 30 and 31. Favor is deceitful. Beauty is vain. Yeah, those things can come and go. But a woman that feareth the Lord, oh, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. What a glorious grand finale to a beautiful book of Scripture. One that's been gendering wisdom female all along, and so how fitting to have women take center stage at the end. Virtuous women, that's wisdom for you. Or like we saw back in chapter 1, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And here at the end of chapter 31, what do we find? A woman that feareth the Lord. And that's wise as well. Fearing God, honoring God, putting Him first in your life. He's wisdom personified. He's sealed to Sophia. I mean, to think about, He knows better than we do. So keep His commandments. Keep the covenant. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. These incredible words of wisdom, I know we've been jumping all over the place thematically, because life tends to do that. And in one moment we need to live this wise way, and another moment we need to do that, and we're shifting gears constantly, but hopefully the one underlying current is God is inspiring us in the way to live. And it's the best way to live. Don't just hold on to Tevye. As the good book says, actually hold on to the good book itself. And these words have passed the test of time. It's not just the wisdom literature of ancient Israel. This is truth, eternal truth. And I pray that we can implement it and be a little wiser ourselves. The way King Benjamin ends his great life-changing address, and if you believe these things, see that you do them. Well, that's a pretty good way to end the study of the book of Proverbs too. If you have recognized the wisdom behind these words, then live this way. It really is the best imaginable way to live.